Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Depths of the Forgotten Abyss. The salty air hung heavy around us, mixing with the scent of diesel and sweat as our small crew crowded the deck of the Riptide, a weathered fishing trawler that had seen better days. The sun was dipping low in the sky, casting a fiery hue across the horizon, but I was far from captivated by its beauty. My focus lay on the restless ocean that stretched endlessly before us, its surface churning like a restless beast. Each wave crashed against the hull, sending sprays of brine that stung my cheeks and tasted metallic on my lips. I had joined this crew on a whim, seeking a break from the mundane rhythm of my life on land. Fishing in the open water promised adventure, a taste of danger. Little did I know that the true danger lay beneath the waves. As the last rays of sun disappeared, I felt a chill creep into the air, pulling my thoughts back to the present. My crewmates, a ragtag group of seasoned fishermen, avoided eye contact as they worked, their faces shadowed by the fading light. I sensed an unspoken tension among them, a collective anxiety that gnawed at the edges of my own resolve. The captain, a grizzled man named Bill, barked orders as he surveyed the horizon. He hadn't spoken much to me, and I was beginning to wonder if that was intentional. "Keep your eyes peeled," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "We'll be setting nets soon. The water's been strange lately." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions grave. I frowned, uncertain of what he meant. "Strange how?" I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Bill turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "You'll see," he replied. We dropped anchor just after twilight, the engine sputtering to a halt as we floated silently on the darkening sea. The crew began to prepare the nets, casting wary glances over their shoulders, as if something lurked just beneath the surface. I joined in, my hands fumbling with the ropes, trying to ignore the growing dread that settled in my stomach. Hours passed under the cloak of night, and the only sounds were the creaking of the boat and the soft lapping of the water against the hull. I worked alongside my crewmates, the rhythm of our tasks becoming a strange comfort in this eerie atmosphere. It was not until I caught a flicker of movement in the water that my heart truly began to race. A shadow darted beneath us, fast and fluid. I froze, squinting into the inky depths. "Did you see that?" I called out, my voice wavering. Bill glanced at me, his face a mask of concern. "Just a fish," he said dismissively, but I noticed the way his eyes darted. He didn't believe his own words. As the night wore on, the unease among the crew grew palpable. Tension crackled in the air, and I found myself straining to hear over the rhythmic sound of the waves. They whispered something in a language I couldn't understand, something ancient and foreboding. We finally dropped the nets, the heavy lines sinking into the cold water. I felt a moment of triumph, but it was short-lived. Moments later, I heard it, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to reverberate from the depths. My gut twisted as I exchanged worried glances with the others. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. Bill's jaw tightened. "Just the ocean," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I positioned myself near the edge of the boat, my heart pounding as I peered into the darkness. The water was a silken black, and for a moment, I thought I saw something glinting beneath the surface, something large. My breath caught in my throat. Then the sound came again, louder this time. It rolled over the waves like thunder, reverberating through the hull of the boat. The crew sprang into action, their movements frantic. "Bring in the nets," Bill shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. I stumbled back, the vessel rocking violently beneath us as I tried to help. There was a change in the atmosphere, a sense of impending doom that settled over us like a shroud. The others fumbled with the ropes, voices raised in panic as they worked against the growing tension. Suddenly, the ocean erupted beside us, water spraying high into the air as something massive breached the surface. I stumbled back, eyes wide in disbelief. A creature, something I had never seen before, surfaced with a horrible grace. Its scales glimmered under the faint light, slick and wet, and its eyes, those eyes glowed like embers in the dark. The crew froze, and for a heartbeat, the world around us seemed to hold its breath. Then the creature let out a sound that twisted my insides, a roar that was both haunting and mournful. Chaos erupted. The crew shouted, scrambling for safety as the creature thrashed against the boat, sending splinters flying from the wooden hull and knocking one man overboard. I screamed, my voice drowned out by the cacophony of fear and confusion. My heart raced as adrenaline surged through me. I had thought the ocean would bring adventure, but I was wrong. The horror of the depths was awakening, and in that moment, I understood the true nature of the sea, dark, ancient, and unforgiving. As the darkness began to swallow us whole, I realized that the real terror was not just what lay beneath the waves, but what we might awaken by trespassing on its domain. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, its last rays swallowed by the endless expanse of the ocean. I stood at the bow of the boat, my fingers grazing the rough, salt-encrusted railing, feeling the chill of the impending night wrap around me. The waves roared like angry spirits, crashing against the hull, sending icy spray to my face. It was then that I first noticed the silence from the others. Until then, the boat buzzed with nervous energy and excited chatter among the crew and the clanking of gear, but now, the atmosphere thickened, heavy with unspoken dread. We had reached the coordinates given to us by the research team, just off the coast of an uninhabited island. The air was different here. It hummed with anticipation, or perhaps foreboding. My friend, Mark, was adjusting the sonar equipment, while Jesse, our marine biologist, peered through the binoculars, scanning the horizon as if searching for something or someone. "Do you see anything?" I asked, pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders. "No," she replied, lowering the binoculars. "But there's a weird current out here. It feels unnatural." Mark chortled, though it lacked his usual mirth. "Just a little bit of sea magic, Jess. Nothing to worry about." I felt my heartbeat quicken as I stared into the darkening waters. "What do you mean by unnatural?" "Just a hunch," she said, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze flickering nervously toward the depths below. "These waters are known for strange happenings. Old legends about creatures lurking below." His laughter faded as Jesse's unease settled over all of us. I forced a smile, trying to shake the lingering tension, but the uneasiness burrowed deeper, refusing to let go. Later that night, as the moon cast a silvery glow over the water, we gathered around a flickering lantern. Mark began recounting tales of lost ships, swallowed by the ocean without a trace, while Jesse shared stories of bizarre sea creatures, rumored to haunt these waters. I listened, half convinced it was all just folklore, but a chill crept up my spine as the darkness pressed in around us. "Do you really believe those stories?" I asked, hoping to ground myself in reality. Mark shrugged. "I mean, there's a reason they keep the island uninhabited. Something must be down there." I chuckled, but it was hollow. The shadows played tricks on my mind, twisting the shapes of the boat, the waves snapping like jaws ready to close in. Jessie fell silent, her focus shifting from the stories to the water, her brow furrowing as though she sensed something brewing beneath the surface. The night wore on, and we decided to take shifts monitoring the sonar. I volunteered for the first watch, the quiet hum of the machine lulling me into a trance. The stars sparkled above, distant and indifferent, while the wind whispered secrets in my ear. I gazed into the abyss, the inky water undulating rhythmically, its depths a dark mystery I felt compelled to explore. As the hours crept by, A sudden blip disrupted the steady pattern of the sonar. My heart raced as I studied the screen. It spiked and faltered before vanishing completely. Unease settled into my bones. I called for Mark, and he stumbled sleepily from the cabin, rubbing his eyes. "Did you see that?" I pointed to the screen. "Something's down there." Mark squinted at the monitor, then back to the water. "It's probably just a fish." But I wasn't convinced. The blip was different, almost deliberate. Ignoring my instinct to panic, I leaned closer, my breath hitching in my throat as another disturbance appeared, a sharp wave forming just beyond the boat. I blinked, and it was gone, slipping back into the tranquil surface. "Mark," I said, my voice shook with urgency. "We need to investigate." He hesitated, glancing at the dark waters. "It's too risky. We don't know what's down there. Or what's watching us," I added, the realization gnawing at my mind. The legends whispered of watchers beneath the waves, unseen eyes tracking our every move. I felt the weight of their gaze upon me, heavy and suffocating. We decided to lower a camera into the water, the device attached to an anchor line. The clicking sound of the mechanism echoed in the stillness as we lowered it deeper, the lights on the camera illuminating the void. The screen flickered to life, revealing a surreal underwater world. The silence was palpable, broken only by the sound of water swirling around us. For a moment, I felt captivated by the beauty of it all, the coral swaying gently, fish darting in and out of view. But then, an ominous shadow lurked at the edges of the camera's light, shifting like a phantom among the coral. "Is that?" Mark's voice faltered. I leaned closer, my heart pounding as the shadow morphed, becoming larger, impossibly so. Before I could respond, the camera jolted violently, the anchor line snapping and sending it plummeting into the depths. Panic gripped me as I shouted, but it was drowned out by the roar of the ocean. I fumbled to reel it back, but the line slipped through my fingers. "Get the boat ready." I yelled to Mark, my voice barely audible over the growing chaos. He nodded, his face pale as he scrambled to the controls. Jesse appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with confusion. "What's happening?" "Something's down there," I said, my voice shaky. "We need to go. Now." As the engine sputtered to life, I stared at the water, bracing for something to break the surface. The tension was a living thing, winding tighter with every heartbeat, every crash of the waves. Just then, an unnatural roar, like the anguish of the ocean itself, echoed through the night, chilling me to the core. It reverberated through the air, rattling my bones, and I felt the unmistakable presence of something monstrous lurking just beneath. I knew then, with a certainty that gripped my heart, that whatever was down there had been awakened. And it was coming for us. The air was thick with salt and despair as I stood at the helm of the cramped fishing vessel, its metal hull groaning beneath the weight of the ocean's relentless waves. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and black. I should have felt relief as night fell, as the heat of the day evaporated into the dusk, but a cold dread crept over me instead. It was hard to shake the feeling that something was lurking in the depths below, waiting for darkness to draw near and reveal its true form. That morning, I had ventured out with my uncle, John, a seasoned fisherman who knew the waters around our small coastal town like the back of his calloused hands. He had an instinct for these things, a sixth sense honed by years of battling the sea. But today, his usual bravado was notably absent, replaced instead by a quiet tension that gnawed at the edges of his demeanor. As we cast our nets, he insisted on staying closer to shore, claiming a storm was brewing further out. But I had seen nothing on the horizon that should have roused such urgency. I was prepared to laugh it off as paranoia until I felt it, the water beneath us thrummed with a pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat. I glanced at John, whose weathered face had taken on a pallid hue. His gaze darted toward the waves, and it was clear he felt it too. "We should head back," he said, his voice edged with an unfamiliar tension. I shrugged off his unease, eager to prove my mettle as a fisherman. "We're fine. There's still plenty of light, and the catch is good today." He didn't respond, his eyes still fixated on the water, his lips drawn tight. I should have heeded his warning, but stubbornness had overridden reason, urging me to push further into the deep. As we fished, the world around us began to transform. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in like a curtain drawn hastily over a stage. The wind picked up, whipping through the boat, rattling our equipment, while an unsettling quiet fell over the sea. There were no cries of gulls, no distant echoes of other boats, just the low thrum of the engine and the sound of water slapping against our hull. "Something's not right," John muttered, his voice almost swallowed by the rising wind. My unease grew with each passing moment. I could feel a dark energy in the air, thick and suffocating. Just as I opened my mouth to suggest we head back, a sharp crack split the atmosphere, a sound like thunder, but too close, too ominous. I whipped my head around, scanning the surface of the water. That was when I saw it. A shape, undulating just below the surface, a vast shadow that shifted and danced beneath the waves. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Something massive lurked beneath us, something that defied explanation. A shiver ran down my spine, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic at bay. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice quivering. John didn't answer. Instead, he stared, his expression a mix of disbelief and dread. Without warning, the boat lurched violently, sending me stumbling against the railing. The water churned as the figure beneath us surged upward, breaching the surface with an explosive force that sent salt water spraying all around. I staggered back, eyes wide, as I caught a glimpse of an enormous, serpentine creature, its scales glimmering with a sickly luminescence, gliding effortlessly just beneath the water's surface. "Get the engine going!" John shouted, his face pale. "Now!" I scrambled to the console, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the controls. The motor sputtered, choking on the tension within the air. I glanced back just in time to see the creature submerging, its massive tail cutting through the water with unsettling grace, leaving a frothy wake behind it. Panic clawed at my insides, urging me to flee. But where could we go? The horizon stretched endlessly, and the dark waves seemed alive with menace. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the throttle forward. The boat jerked, gaining speed as we tore across the surface, the creature's presence looming just beneath us like a shadow pursuing its prey. The night closed in around us, and the stars flickered feebly in the abyss above. My breath quickened as I kept my gaze fixated on the water, half expecting the creature to spring up again. John leaned over the side, his hands gripping the railing, his expression a mix of terror and determination. "Keep your eyes open," he yelled. "We need to watch for it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late, that whatever was down there had marked us. With the boat now skimming over the waves, I felt a momentary sense of relief. We had outpaced the monster. But then I saw it, a massive form rising from the depths, breaking the surface like a dark spire. It was closer now, its eyes, if they could be called that, glinting like deep-set jewels in the pale moonlight. A low rumble echoed through the air, reverberating in my chest, and I could swear it was laughing. Laughter from the abyss. We were not alone. The ocean, in all its unfathomable mystery, held secrets more terrifying than I had ever imagined. We were trespassers, and the cost of our intrusion was imminent. My fingers gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and I felt the weight of fear settle like lead in my stomach. The chase was on, but the creature had the advantage. In its world, we were merely fleeting shadows on a vast canvas of darkness. And as it lunged again, I understood I might never escape. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a purplish hue over the vast ocean. The waves sloshed gently against the hull of our small fishing boat, the Sea Whisperer. It had been a long day on the water, and even though the catch was meager, the weight of the impending night filled me with an unsettling dread. I had joined the crew with hopes of escaping the monotony of my landlocked life, craving the salty air and the thrill of the sea. Mark, the seasoned captain, had taken me under his wing, but now, as dusk settled in, I was beginning to question my choices. There were whispers among the crew, stories shared in hushed tones that gnawed at the edges of my curiosity. They spoke of shadows beneath the waves, of strange occurrences at sea that seemed to defy logic. I brushed the tales aside at first, but the mounting tension aboard our vessel left me restless. As twilight wrapped around us, the wind picked up, causing the boat to sway lightly. I stood at the stern, staring out into the darkening water. The shimmering surface seemed to pulse with a life of its own, beckoning me closer. I could almost hear it whispering secrets. I shook my head, pushing back the creeping sense of unease. I turned to join the others, but my gaze caught on something moving beneath the surface. A flicker, a shadow that darted deeper into the inky depths. My heart raced as I squinted, searching for any sign of what I had seen. Perhaps it was just my imagination, playing tricks as the sun disappeared entirely and the stars began their watch. I hesitated, then laughed softly to myself. I was allowing the stories to get to me, nothing more. "Hey, Jack." Mark's voice broke through my thoughts. "Get over here. We need to start hauling the nets in." I moved to the front of the boat where the others were gathered, each of them lit by the soft glow of a battery-operated lantern. The atmosphere was electric, thick with the anticipation of what we might bring up. As I helped with the nets, I noticed Scott, the youngest crew member, kept glancing over his shoulder, peering into the dark water as if expecting something to rise up and drag him down. "Scott, you all right?" I asked, pausing in my work. "Yeah, just thought I saw something," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The air felt tense. "We're all on edge, buddy." "Just the dark playing tricks," I reassured him, but the uncertainty in his eyes made my own stomach twist. With the nets pulled aboard, we sorted through the meager haul, mostly small fish, with the occasional crab. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the sound of the waves and the rhythmic creaking of the boat. I couldn't shake the feeling that something watched us from below, lurking just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. Around midnight, Mark decided to take a break, leaving Scott and me in charge of the nets while the other crew members drifted to sleep. The ocean had quieted, a calmness settling that felt almost unnatural, like the deep breath before a storm. I felt the urge to glance over the side again, the pull of the dark water almost magnetic. I fought against it, focusing instead on the nets. But then I saw it again, a dark shape gliding beneath the surface. This time it was larger, more defined. My heart raced as I pointed it out to Scott, who had fallen into a trance of his own thoughts. "Look," I said, my voice a harsh whisper. He followed my gaze, his eyes widening in fear. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, the water roiled, and the surface erupted. A massive creature leapt from the depths, its form twisting and contorting in the air before crashing back down in a flurry of spray. It was an abomination, something far larger than any fish I had ever seen, with scales that glimmered even in the dark. My mind struggled to process it, a grotesque mixture of nightmare and reality. "What do we do?" Scott stammered, glancing between me and the water. "Get Mark," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me as I grabbed a lantern and swung it toward the surface. The creature had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the faint ripples behind. I sprinted toward the cabin, my pulse echoing in my ears. I found Mark sprawled on the bunk, snoring softly. "Mark!" I yelled, shaking him awake. "You need to see this." He groaned, rubbing his eyes. What's going on, Jack? There's something in the water. It's huge. At that, he tossed off the blankets, urgency replacing his drowsiness. We rushed back to the deck together, and I grabbed the lantern, illuminating the dark expanse of water. But it was too late. Whatever had frightened us had vanished again, leaving only the faintest hint of movement. Where? Mark demanded, his voice firm, his demeanor shifting from sleepiness to concern. I swear it was right here. It was massive. Scott stood frozen, his eyes darting nervously across the surface. I saw it too, Mark. We can't just sit here. Mark hesitated and then turned to the engine, firing it back to life, the electric hum vibrating beneath our feet. All right, let's move. We'll get a better look. As we sped across the water, the moonlight illuminated the waves, casting everything in a ghostly glow. My heart raced as I scanned the surface for any sign of the creature. The ocean felt alive around us, an unseen force that lurked just below. The stories the crew had told me suddenly felt too real, too close. We traveled for what felt like eternity, the tension mounting with every passing moment. My instinct screamed that we had stirred something that should have remained undisturbed. It was just a fishing trip. It was supposed to be mundane. But now the thrill of adventure had twisted into something sinister. Then, in the moonlight, we saw it again, a dark silhouette breaking the surface, moving gracefully with a predatory grace. My breath caught in my throat as Mark shouted orders, but they were drowned out by the roar of the engine. All I could do was watch, transfixed with terror as the shadow slipped beneath us, vanishing into the depths once more. In that moment, with the full weight of dread pressing down upon us, I knew that something terrible awaited us in the dark waters, something that had claimed the souls of sailors long before. The ocean was no longer a friend. It had become a haunting abyss, holding mysteries that were better left undisturbed. The ocean stretched endlessly, a vast blanket of indigo and black, as I braced myself against the railing of the rescue vessel. The wind whipped through my hair, bringing with it the briny scent of salt and the nagging remnants of fear. Below, the dark waves churned hungrily, concealing the secrets of those who had ventured too far into their depths. I had been back on dry land for a mere 2 days, yet every creak of the ship's hull, every crash of the surf, pulled me back to that fateful day on the Endeavor. The memory of the last descent would never leave me. We had been there to document the wreck, to piece together the story of the ship that had vanished without a trace. My colleagues, fearless and eager, had dismissed the local legends as mere folklore. But I remembered how the fishermen had regarded the waters with a mix of reverence and dread. The ocean, they said, had a hunger that could not be satisfied. I glanced back at my crewmates, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights of the ship. They were prepping the equipment, oblivious to the weight of what lay beneath the surface. "You all right, Sam?" Mike called out, his voice breaking through the din of the wind and waves. "Yeah, just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my lips. I could hear the churning of my stomach, a reminder that no amount of bravado could quell the unease festering within me. We were heading toward the coordinates of the wreck, but my thoughts drifted back to the night we first descended into the abyss. The dive had been exhilarating at first, the thrill of exploration pushing us beyond the limits of fear. I remembered my excitement as we sank deeper, the world above shrinking into a mere memory, replaced by an eerie silence. But then, we had crossed the threshold. The moment we found the Endeavor, a ghostly silhouette emerging from the dark, a dread washed over me. The water had felt alive, pulsating with a rhythm that resonated deep in my bones. I had watched my colleagues swim toward the wreck, eager to document its mysteries, while I hesitated, entranced and terrified, my heart pounding like a war drum. It happened so fast. The shadow darted past my peripheral vision, a blur that sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. I had turned just in time to see a large, dark form retreating into the darkness. A creature, or perhaps a figment of my imagination, but my instinct screamed that it was real. The panic had set in as I gasped for breath, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't follow them. The lights of the submersible flickered as if sensing my fear. I could hear their laughter echoing through the comms, oblivious to my growing dread. I had felt the water shift around me, something cold and ancient brushing against my leg, and I had screamed, not caring if it made me sound weak. That night, the abyss didn't just feel dark, it felt alive, wrapping around me like a shroud. We had surfaced, the others exhilarated by the find, but I was haunted. The faces of my colleagues twisted in joy felt like masks hiding deeper truths. I had tried to convince them to leave, but they laughed it off, their eyes gleaming with excitement. I felt alone, standing on that precipice, unsure of what was real and what was a phantasm of my fear. Now, aboard this vessel, the familiar sensation of unease returned as we approached the wreck site, shadows dancing in the depths below. I gripped the railing tighter, searching for any sign of the anomaly that had plagued my dreams. The ocean seemed to echo with hushed warnings, the waves whispering secrets as they lapped against the sides of the ship. Ready to dive? Mike's voice broke my reverie, and I nodded, though my heart sank further into my chest. The dive gear felt heavier than before, a harbinger of what awaited beneath. As we descended once again, a chill ran through me, the shadows shifted unnaturally. I could almost hear the whispers beneath the waves, urging me to turn back. The descent felt longer this time, each foot deeper, intensifying the weight of the water pressing in on us. I focused on the glow of our lights cutting through the dark, searching for the outline of the Endeavor. And then we spotted it, looming out of the darkness like a forgotten relic of despair. The wreck was more menacing than I had imagined, its hull encrusted with barnacles, a tombstone for those lost to the sea. The silence was palpable, an oppressive blanket that stifled any hope of comfort. Equipment deployed, the team began their work. I followed at a distance, my body moving on autopilot, while my mind spiraled. Each flicker of light revealed more of the ship's haunted visage. The feeling of being watched overwhelmed me, and I scanned the dark waters for any movement. The others were too engrossed to notice my agitation. As we navigated through the wreckage, I caught a glimpse of something shifting in the darkness. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage like a prisoner desperate to escape. A dark shape curled around a beam, then vanished, slipping away like smoke. I froze, dread crawling up my spine. It was there again, lurking just beyond the reach of our lights. Sam. You good? Mike's voice shattered my focus, and I forced a nod, though I felt anything but. I fought to calm my racing heart, but the creature's presence loomed large in my mind. Whatever it was, it taunted me from the shadows. The others continued their work, oblivious to the lurking menace. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, to pull them back to safety, but I was paralyzed. I was trapped between the wreck and the dark, the abyss whispering promises of terror. I wanted to shout, to warn them, but I felt swallowed by the ocean's depths, the weight of its ancient secrets pressing down upon me. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for a painful moment. Panic surged through me as I flailed in the void, my breath hitching in my throat. When the lights returned, chaos erupted around me. My colleagues shouted in alarm as a massive shape surged forward from the shadows. It lunged toward us, a blur of dark limbs and glistening scales, its eyes burning with a predatory hunger. Time slowed as I realized the truth. The ocean had not only claimed the Endeavor, it had taken something more, something that had woken from its slumber, hungry for the trespassers who had dared to intrude. Story 2, Isolation's Grasp, the Cabin's Secret. The whispering pines surrounded us like sentinels, their towering forms casting elongated shadows that danced across the forest floor. I had never been one for the outdoors. The thought of being away from city lights and the constant hum of civilization sent shivers down my spine. But when my college friend suggested a weekend getaway at a cabin in the woods, I reluctantly agreed. I was tired of being the odd one out, the friend who always said no. The cabin itself was a relic of a simpler time, resting uneasily at the edge of a small clearing. Its weathered wood and chipped paint gave it a charm that felt almost deceptive. No one had been there in years, and remnants of a long-forgotten life lingered in the form of rusted tools and a sagging porch swing that creaked ominously with every breeze. As we unloaded the car, I felt an inexplicable chill wrap around my spine, a warning I brushed off as my imagination playing tricks. There were 4 of us: Eli, the ever-optimistic one; Sarah, with her infectious laughter; Ben, whose skeptical nature often led him to challenge the bizarre; and me, the reluctant participant. As we settled into our surroundings, the laughter grew louder, drowning out the forest's whispers. We played card games and shared stories, the flickering fire casting eerie shadows that seemed to watch us in silence. As night fell, the air grew heavy, the jovial atmosphere shifting into something more oppressive. The darkness was deeper here, as if the woods consumed any light that dared to creep in. An unsettling tension settled over us like a thick fog. I suggested we tell ghost stories, a decision I instantly regretted. Ben rolled his eyes but reluctantly joined in. Eli's tale of a vengeful spirit haunting the woods was met with nervous giggles, but as he punctuated his story with howls, the laughter faded into nervous glances. When I finally shared my own story, a local legend I had heard growing up, I noticed the way Ben's face grew pale. It was the tale of a man who had vanished without a trace while hiking and whose cries for help echoed in the woods long after his disappearance. I had always thought it was nonsense, but as the words left my lips, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The night deepened, and the fire dwindled to embers. Sarah suggested we head in, but Eli, emboldened by the stories, insisted we stay out a little longer. I felt uneasy, my instinct screaming at me to leave the woods and retreat into the safety of the cabin. However, the others were adamant, and I was easily swayed. We made a pact to brave the chill for just a little longer. Minutes turned to hours as the silence pressed around us. The laughter dwindled, replaced by an uneasy tension. I glanced at the tree line. Shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, creeping closer as if drawn by our presence. I tried to convince myself it was just the forest playing tricks, but the feeling of being watched clawed at the edges of my mind. A sudden rustling in the underbrush snapped my attention. My heart raced, and I turned to the group, but they were too engrossed in conversation to notice. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. They laughed, dismissing my concern with playful nudges. I tried to shake off the fear, convincing myself it was just a deer or some other creature seeking shelter. Then, crashing footsteps echoed from the darkness, too heavy for a deer. Something was out there. I stood, frozen as the sound drew closer, a cacophony of snapping twigs and heavy breathing. My heart pounded, cutting through the veil of laughter that enveloped my friends. "Guys, seriously," I think I started, but the words caught in my throat. Eli's laughter faded, and for a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. We all felt it then, the oppressive weight of something waiting, watching. That's when I saw it. A figure, barely discernible in the dim light, stood at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and thin, shrouded in shadows, with arms that seemed too long for its body. My heart dropped as it tilted its head, as if studying us. I took a step back, my breath hitching, a primal urge to flee gripping me. "Guys, look." I finally managed to croak out. They turned in unison, their faces shifting from confusion to horror as they caught sight of the figure. Then it vanished, melting back into the trees with an unnatural swiftness, leaving us in stunned silence. Eli was the first to speak, his voice shaky. "It was just a trick of the light, right?" But we all knew that was a lie. The laughter that had once filled the air was replaced with an overwhelming silence, as if the woods themselves held their breath. A chill swept through me, deeper than the night itself. I urged the group to head inside, my instinct screaming that we were no longer alone. As we hurried back, I glanced over my shoulder toward the trees, half expecting to see that figure again. The forest loomed behind us, dark and foreboding, its secrets buried deep in the shadows. Inside the cabin, the sense of safety that should have enveloped us instead felt hollow, as if the walls were closing in, trapping us with the unspoken dread that had invaded our minds. I could see it in their eyes, the same fear that crept my own heart. We weren't just telling stories anymore. We had awakened something in the woods, and whatever it was watching. The following morning brought with it an uneasy light. The sun crept through the tall pines surrounding the cabin, casting long shadows that danced unnaturally on the wooden floor. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the gentle rustling of leaves outside. It was a stark contrast to the feeling churning inside me. This place, once an escape, now felt like a cage. I pushed the covers aside, cold air hitting my skin, and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards creaked beneath me as I stood. I glanced out the small window, half expectant for some reassurance from the familiar landscape. Instead, the forest loomed like a sentient being, each tree exuding a sense of malevolence I couldn't shake off. The dreams from last night lingered in my mind, dark shapes lurking amongst the trees, whispering tales I couldn't quite hear. I made my way to the kitchen, the wood stove cold and unused. I rummaged through the cupboards, hoping to find something, anything, that could bring me comfort. My fingers brushed over a half-empty box of stale crackers and a jar of peanut butter. It would have to suffice. I sat at the small table, staring out the window while I chewed, the dry texture of the crackers clumping in my throat. As I swallowed the last bite, the unease returned. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The day before, I had tried to convince myself that my fears were unfounded, that the cabin's isolation was only a minor inconvenience. But now, as the sun rose higher in the sky, I felt a pull towards the forest, an inexplicable urge to explore its depths and uncover whatever mysteries lay beyond the immediate confines of the cabin. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the cold air biting into my skin. The woods felt different in the light, less intimidating, maybe even inviting. I brushed off the chill and took a deep breath, focusing on the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. The tranquility of the forest was deceptive, a serene veneer covering something darker lurking beneath. I started down the narrow path that led into the trees, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the soft layer of pine needles. The further I walked, the more the cabin faded from my thoughts. My mind began to clear, each step drawing me away from the previous night's lingering dread. But that peace wasn't destined to last. After a few minutes, the path forked, and I hesitated. Something pulled me to the left, an instinct that felt too primal to ignore. I followed the trail deeper into the woods, where the canopy thickened overhead, casting an eerie twilight across the ground. Sunlight flickered like a dying ember, and shadows clung to the trees. I had to remind myself that they were just trees, solid and immovable, but my heart raced as I moved further away from the cabin. The path narrowed until it almost disappeared beneath a tangle of underbrush. My legs brushed against wet ferns and graveled soil, but I pressed on. I needed to know what secrets the forest held, even if a small voice in the back of my mind warned me I would regret this. Soon, I stumbled upon a clearing. At its center was a stone well, ancient and covered in moss. The well was a relic of a time long past, its stones weathered and worn. I approached cautiously, remembering the stories my father had told me as a child, tales of wells that whispered and beckoned, where people vanished after peering too deeply into their depths. I peered over the edge, the darkness below seeming to pulse, as if alive. A chill ran through me, and I stepped back, my heart thudding wildly in my chest. But before I could turn away, I heard it, a soft, barely there sound. A voice, or perhaps just the wind. I strained to listen, the air thickening with tension. "Help me," it seemed to whisper, but the words were indistinct, lost within the rustling leaves. I stumbled back against a tree, my breath hitching in my throat. For a moment, I stood there, frozen, every instinct screaming at me to flee. But some strange compulsion rooted me to the spot. I couldn't look away from the well, a dark void that called to something deep within me. "Help me," the voice repeated, clearer this time, as if it were reaching out directly to me. I tore my gaze from the well and bolted back toward the path, branches clawing at my arms as I ran. My heart raced, the echo of my footsteps drowning out the whispers of the forest. I didn't stop until I reached the familiar outline of the cabin, but it offered no comfort. Instead, it loomed ahead like an ominous sentinel, its windows dark and hollow, holding secrets I was terrified to uncover. I burst inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, my skin crawling as I recounted the vision of the well, the voice that had called to me. I could feel the weight of the woods pressing against the walls, urging me to return to uncover what lay hidden in the shadows. But I could not be swayed. I would not let the dark pull draw me back. I needed to stay strong, to reclaim my sense of safety within these walls. As I turned to the dim interior, the air thick with silence, I heard it again, just a murmur, but it echoed through the cabin as if it were inside my own mind. "Help me." I clasped my hands over my ears, a futile attempt to drown out the sound. The cabin that had once felt like a refuge now seemed to close in on me, shadows stretching and twisting like restless spirits. I was now alone, not here, not any longer. The woods had marked me, and I was afraid it was only a matter of time before I became part of their dark narrative. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, but the beauty of it was lost on me. I stood in the cabin, watching the shadows lengthen in the corners, feeling their weight settle heavily upon my shoulders. It had been 2 days since I had come to this place, a last-minute decision to escape the chaos of my life, yet everything had gone wrong. The silence was suffocating. Even the chirping of crickets had ceased, leaving an unsettling stillness. I had come here for peace, but a creeping dread invaded my thoughts, a sensation that the woods surrounding me were not as tranquil as they seemed. The first night, I had heard whispers echoing through the trees, indistinct and fleeting. I had convinced myself they were figments of my imagination, remnants of a tired mind. But the next morning, I discovered footprints outside my cabin, bare and too small for an adult. I felt an incongruous chill at the back of my neck, as if someone had been watching me. I spent that day trying to convince myself I was being paranoid, but the gnawing feeling persisted. I found myself constantly glancing out of the cabin window, searching for movement among the trees. Each rustle of leaves made my heart race, and I couldn't shake the image of those small footprints. I took to pacing, my footsteps echoing in the empty space, trying to distract myself from the gnawing fear that had taken hold. As dusk descended again, a sense of urgency gripped me. I had to leave, but my car was parked far down the gravel road, a good 15-minute walk away. Each step felt like a gamble, a test of my courage against whatever lurked beyond the veil of trees. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight, the eerie quiet pressing against my senses as I stepped outside. Thick fog began to creep in, swirling around my ankles like a living entity. I flared the flashlight, illuminating the path ahead, the beam trembling as I pointed it into the dense darkness. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath my boots, punctuated by the occasional rustle of branches swaying in the cold night breeze. I reached the edge of the forest, where the trees stood like sentinels. A shiver ran down my spine as I glanced back at the cabin, its silhouette now shrouded in mist. I hesitated, the nagging pull of some unseen force urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, convinced that getting to my car was the only way to reclaim my sense of safety. Then I heard it, a soft giggle. It was so faint, I thought it might have been a trick of the wind, but it resonated through the trees, sending ice through my veins. I froze, holding my breath, straining to catch another sound. It came again, closer this time, the unmistakable chime of a child's laughter. I shone the flashlight into the murk of the trees, but nothing emerged. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I found myself rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The laughter rang out once more, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. The woods felt alive, an encroaching presence circling around me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The fear that had gripped me transformed into a simmering anger. What kind of sick joke was this? The laughter stopped. Silence enveloped me, more oppressive than before. I turned to flee, heart racing as I stumbled down the path, the flashlight beam darting erratically. The forest closed in around me, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes. I didn't dare look back, but I felt it, a shadow trailing me, just out of sight. The footfalls were quick and light, almost playful, mimicking my own hurried steps. I rounded a bend, and the beam of light caught a flash of movement between the trees. "Stop!" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "This isn't funny." The laughter returned, this time a cacophony, echoing and bouncing off the bark of the trees like some malevolent spirit had taken residence among them. I could sense the presence of something small and quick, darting just beyond the range of my flashlight. Suddenly, I lost my footing, my ankle twisting painfully as I fell to the ground. The flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I hissed in pain, but the laughter intensified, taunting me now. I crawled on my hands and knees, desperate to retrieve the light, but it was swallowed by the shadows. In that moment, I felt utterly exposed, the darkness closing in like a shroud. I turned to look behind me, dread pooling in my stomach. The laughter faded, replaced by a soft, sing-song voice that seemed to float through the air. "Come play with us." The words sent a jolt of terror through me. I managed to stand, my heart pounding, and limped forward, panic propelling me toward the road. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled over roots and rocks, the faint glow of headlights now visible through the trees. The teasing voice echoed again, "We're waiting for you." I burst through the thicket and onto the gravel road, glancing back one last time. The woods stood ominously silent, as if mocking my terror. The cabin loomed behind me, dark and foreboding, and I knew I would never return there again. Even as I reached the safety of my car, the echo of that laughter lingered in my ears, a haunting reminder of what lurked just beyond the edge of civilization. Darkness had its secrets, and I had unwittingly stepped into its grip, leaving me questioning not just my safety, but my sanity. The first light of dawn crept through the cracked window pane, illuminating the dust motes hanging in the stale air of the cabin. I sat upright in bed, the thin blanket twisted around my legs like a shroud. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind, a dissonant symphony of fear and confusion. I could still hear the echo of the whispers, distant yet haunting, drifting through the trees, taunting me at the edge of my sanity. I stepped out of bed, the cool wood floor biting into my bare feet. The cabin felt different in the daylight, less claustrophobic but more ominous. Shadows clung to the corners, and the air carried a chilling current. I rubbed my arms, trying to ward off the unease that prickled my skin. After washing my face at the sink, I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, shadows deepening beneath them as if the night had carved lines into my skin. I wondered if I could convince myself to leave, to flee back to the safety of the city where the sounds of civilization drowned out the whispers of the woods. But something deep inside urged me to stay, to uncover the truth hidden within the cabin's walls. I ventured to the main room, where remnants of my friends' laughter echoed in the furniture and the sullen silence. The few belongings they had left behind were stark reminders of their absence. I found my phone on the coffee table, screen dark and lifeless. I pressed the power button repeatedly, but it remained stubbornly blank. With a sense of dread, I realized I was entirely cut off from the outside world. Outside, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. I opened the door, the hinges protesting with a creak that sounded like a whisper warning me not to go. The forest loomed before me, the tall trees standing sentinel as if watching my every move. I forced myself to step outside, the damp earth squishing under my feet as I moved toward the place where my friends had disappeared. As I walked deeper into the woods, the sounds of the cabin faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a crow. My heart raced, each step felt heavy, each breath labored as the oppressive weight of the trees closed in around me. I willed myself to focus, to chase the last echoes of laughter that had once filled these woods. The path twisted and turned, overgrown with weeds and thorny brambles. I pushed through, skin snagging against the sharp edges. Eventually, I stumbled upon a clearing, a small glade encircled by gnarled roots and ancient trees. At the center lay a circle of stones, weathered and moss-covered, like the remnants of some forgotten ritual. I knelt beside the stones, a sense of foreboding settling in my gut. Something about this place felt wrong, as if it had been touched by something otherworldly. Goosebumps crawled up my arms, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I whirled around, scanning the trees that loomed like silent witnesses, but found nothing. A rustle broke the stillness, and I turned back to the stones. A flash of movement caught my eye. Straining to see, I saw something darting between the trees. My heart raced, a primal instinct urging me to run, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. I stood, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me, and took a step toward the rustling. "Hello?" My voice trembled, swallowed by the forest. Silence wrapped around me like a vice, and for a moment, I thought about the warnings I had laughed off. The locals had spoken in hushed tones of the woods, of things that watched and listened, of things that lured the unsuspecting into their grasp. I had dismissed it all as superstition. Now, I felt the truth of it creeping into my bones. Suddenly, a figure burst from the underbrush, a small, scrappy dog with matted fur, panting heavily. I exhaled, relief washing over me. It looked like it had been lost for ages, eyes wide and frantic. I crouched down, offering a hand. The dog hesitated, then approached cautiously, sniffing at my fingers before nudging against my palm. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, scratching behind its ears. It seemed to relish the attention, tail wagging feebly. "Where did you come from?" As I looked around, the branches above swayed ominously, and dark clouds gathered, blotting out the sun. The wind picked up, carrying with it a low growl that sent chills down my spine. I straightened, unease pooling in the pit of my stomach. Shadows morphed and shifted around me, and I felt an unsettling presence lurking just beyond my vision. The dog barked suddenly, breaking the spell of silence, and I turned back to it. Its body was rigid, hackles raised, staring into the tree-line with an intensity that paralyzed me. I followed its gaze, but the trees remained still. Then I heard it, the whispers, low and indecipherable, weaving through the air like a sinister melody. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I backed away instinctively, dragging the dog with me. "Let's go," I whispered, the sound of my own voice barely recognizable. I turned to flee, but the forest seemed to close in, branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The dog bolted past me, darting back toward the cabin, and I followed, adrenaline surging in my veins. I could hear the whispers intensifying, a cacophony of voices growing louder with each step I took. Fear fueled my flight as I stumbled over roots and rocks, the underbrush clawing at my legs. When I reached the cabin, I pushed the door open and slammed it behind me, locking it with trembling fingers. My heart pounded in my chest, and I slid down to the floor, gasping for breath. The little dog curled up beside me, its warmth a small comfort against the suffocating terror that loomed outside. But even within the cabin's walls, the whispers seeped through, relentless and insistent, promising that I was never truly alone. The air was thick with an unsettling silence that afternoon, the kind that clung to the skin and sank into the bones. I stepped outside the cabin, squinting against the dim light that filtered through a canopy of twisted branches overhead. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their gnarled roots weaving through the earth, and I felt their presence more acutely than ever. It was as if they were watching, waiting for something to unfold. The events of the previous night played over in my mind like a broken record. I couldn't shake the image of the shadow moving just beyond the tree line, nor the faint sound that echoed in my ears, the distant, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to call my name. I had tried to convince myself it was nothing more than the wind rustling through the leaves, but deep down, I knew better. A chill crawled up my spine as I recalled the sensation of being watched. It was a feeling I had never experienced before, yet it felt all too familiar now. Determined to shake off the remnants of fear, I took a deep breath and walked toward the edge of the clearing. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and damp leaves, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread. Each step felt like a betrayal of my instincts, urging me to turn back, but I was too restless. I needed to understand what was happening around me. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had morphed into a prison of my own making, filled with echoes of what I now feared might be an inescapable fate. I reached the tree line and stopped, peering into the shadowy depths. The forest beyond was darker than I remembered, the underbrush thick and unwelcoming. It felt as though a veil had descended, obscuring the path forward and erasing any sense of direction. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, pressing my back against a sturdy oak, hoping to draw strength from its ancient roots. As I stood there, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves with a sudden ferocity that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to head back, but a sound caught my attention, a soft, rhythmic thumping that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest itself. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the morbid curiosity that drew me deeper. The thumping grew louder, echoing against the trees. I strained to pinpoint its source, but it remained elusive, like a whisper slipping through my fingers. I stepped forward cautiously, each movement deliberate as I navigated through the thicket. The air felt heavy, thick with an impending storm, and I could taste the metallic tang of anxiety on my tongue. Then, I saw it, a flicker of movement up ahead, something pale and fragile caught in the dappled light. My heart raced as I approached, bracing myself for what I might find. It was then that I noticed a clearing opening up ahead, the trees parting like a curtain to reveal a sight that sent my stomach lurching. At the center of the clearing lay a stone altar, covered in moss and dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth, forming a crude circle around the altar, and the thumping sound crescendoed, melding with the rustle of the wind like a sinister chant. I could feel it thrumming in my chest, resonating with a deep-rooted fear that clawed at my sanity. I wanted to turn back, but an unseen force kept me rooted in place. The thumping intensified, and just as I began to back away, I caught sight of something else, a figure standing just beyond the altar. I blinked, struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. It was tall and thin, shrouded in rags that blended seamlessly with the forest around it. A face obscured by shadow, yet even from a distance, I could feel its gaze piercing through me. My breath quickened, and dread flooded my senses. I turned to run, adrenaline surging through my veins, but the thumping morphed into a chorus of whispers, beckoning me back, pulling me toward the altar. Panic seized me, but I fought it, forcing my legs to move, to carry me away from the nightmare that threatened to consume me. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches snagging at my clothes as I tore my way back to the cabin. My heart raced as I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. The silence of the cabin enveloped me, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my mind racing with the horrors I had witnessed. But there was no solace to be found. The whispers lingered in the corners of my mind, shadows dancing just beyond the periphery of my vision. I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to block out the sound, the image of that figure haunting me. I turned and glanced around the dimly lit room, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. The cabin felt like a prison, walls closing in as the truth dawned on me. Something was very wrong in these woods. I had stumbled upon a secret, one that was never meant to be uncovered. Whatever ancient force resided here was clawing its way back into the world, and now it had noticed me. The realization clenched my insides with a cold grip. There was no escape from the horrors that lurked just beyond the threshold of my fear. Story 3: Echoes of the Silent Woods. The chill of the autumn wind wrapped around me like an unwelcome embrace as I stood at the edge of the dense woods, the last remnants of sunlight filtering through the trees. I always found comfort in nature, but there was something unnerving about the woods that day, something alive in the rustle of the leaves. It was only my second hunting trip since I returned to my hometown, but I felt the familiar warmth of nostalgia mixed with a creeping sense of dread. The stories my father told me reverberated in my mind, tales of hunters who ventured into these very woods and encountered things they could scarcely describe. As a child, I had listened wide-eyed, half believing. Now, I felt a tight knot in my stomach as I recalled the warnings, told in gravelly whispers by old men at the diner, the ones about the things that watched from the shadows. With a deep breath, I tightened my grip on my rifle, the weight of it both comforting and heavy. I stepped forward, the leaves crunching beneath my boots, each sound seeming amplified in the stillness. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced ominously around me. I had come here to escape the chaos of the city, to reconnect with myself, but the woods seemed to have a mind of their own, a hunger I couldn't quite comprehend. As I ventured deeper, I recalled my father's teachings: always watch the ground, always listen. They were lessons I'd followed without question in my youth, but as an adult, I found myself wrestling with disbelief. I chuckled softly to myself, trying to erase the tension that had begun building in my shoulders. Perhaps it was just the isolation getting to me. The sound of my own breathing became a distraction as the silence enveloped me. Hours passed, and the shadows grew longer. I spotted movement in the underbrush, a flash of brown. My heart raced, adrenaline prickling at my skin. I steadied my aim, but as I squinted, the creature vanished. I cursed under my breath, the disappointment mingling with a strange sense of foreboding. That wasn't the first time I felt something watching me. The sensation had lingered since I entered the woods. I continued to move, my senses heightened, but every snap of a twig seemed to echo too loudly. Every whisper of wind felt like a voice from beyond. I made my way to a clearing, an old, familiar spot where my father had taught me how to track deer. The memories flooded back, his laughter, his voice calm and authoritative. He had seemed invincible, guiding me through the maze of trees and shadows. As I settled in, the air shifted, thickening with an energy I couldn't name. I took a long sip from my canteen, the cold water barely quenching the growing unease in my gut. I tried to focus on the hunt, setting my sights on the darkening woods, brushing aside the nagging feeling of being watched. It was just me now, alone with the haunting memories of my father and those eerie stories. Just as twilight fell upon the land, I heard a low growl, resonating from deep within the trees. My heart stopped for a moment. It wasn't the sound of any animal I recognized, more akin to a warning, primal and chilling. Instinctively, I raised my rifle, scanning the shadows, but the clearing remained still, too still. I felt the pulse of the woods around me, as if they were holding their breath. "Come on, it's just the wind," I muttered to myself, but the words sounded hollow, echoing against the oppressive silence. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my nerves. I had to shake off these thoughts. It was only a hunting trip, not the stuff of nightmares. As darkness settled in, the forest transformed, shadows stretching and bending, playing tricks on my mind. I would have called it paranoia, but that growl, the way it reverberated around me, felt too real. My muscles tensed as I strained to listen, scanning the tree line for any sign of a creature lurking just beyond the reach of my sight. Minutes passed in agonizing stillness until the growl ripped through the air once more, closer this time. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight. I turned slowly, peering into the suffocating darkness, but there was nothing, just the dense silhouettes of trees looming over me like ancient sentinels, judging my intrusion. I forced my feet to move, instinct driving me to retreat. The path I had taken seemed foreign now, every direction an illusion in the dim light. I was lost. Panic clawed at my throat as I stumbled backward, trying to retrace my steps. Suddenly, a rustling erupted from the underbrush to my left, and before I could react, a massive shape burst forth. I raised my rifle, but I hesitated. The creature stood tall, its eyes glinting with an unnatural intelligence. It was neither deer nor wolf. It was something altogether different, something that didn't belong. I felt my breath hitch as it regarded me with an intensity that froze me in place. Then it moved, a blur of fur and teeth, and before I had the chance to react, it was gone, disappearing into the shadows. I was left trembling, the weight of its presence still heavy in the air, mingling with the lingering scent of damp earth and decay. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in rhythm with my thundering footsteps. The haunted woods echoed with a new kind of fear, a deeper terror that whispered of stories left untold and hunters who had never returned. I had come seeking solace, but I was not welcome here. The woods had a secret, and it was hungry for intruders like me. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting elongated shadows that danced across the forest floor. I heard the whisper of the wind, a sound that felt alive, as if the woods were breathing with me. I had been hunting with my father since I was old enough to hold a rifle, our bond sealing itself with the crisp snap of twigs beneath our feet and the rustle of leaves as we scoured the underbrush for game. Yet, something about this trip felt different, heavier, as if the air itself carried a warning I failed to heed. We began our search at dawn, venturing into the depths of the Blackwood Forest. The locals often shared tales of its vastness, how it consumed even the most experienced hunters who dared to stray too far. The way they spoke made it sound as if the trees held secrets, as if each gnarled root and twisted branch was a keeper of stories best left untold. My father, a man of few words, often brushed such tales aside with an absent wave of his hand. There was no room for superstition in the heart of a hunter. But as the hours stretched and the sun climbed higher, a gnawing unease settled in my stomach. The forest felt too quiet, the usual chorus of chirping birds and rustling animals conspicuously absent. I glanced at my father, who walked ahead, his silhouette framed by the mottled sunlight filtering through the canopy. He seemed unbothered, his focus fixed on the task at hand. I tried to shake off my apprehension, reminding myself that hunting was always a blend of patience and perseverance. I followed him deeper into the woods until we reached a clearing, a small glade bordered by thick underbrush. My father knelt, inspecting the ground. He brushed his fingers over the earth, tracing a set of tracks that looked unfamiliar to me. They were larger than anything I had encountered, the edges sharp and deep, as if whatever had made them had walked here with purpose. I felt a shiver travel down my spine. "What do you think?" I asked, attempting to mask the tremor in my voice. "Big game," he replied curtly, his brow furrowing. "We should stay sharp." As we pressed forward, I could feel the temperature drop, the coolness wrapping around me like a damp blanket. I shivered involuntarily, glancing around at the looming trees that seemed to close in on us. The atmosphere thickened, the forest transforming into a maze of shadows and echoes. Every snap of a twig or distant rustle set my heart racing. We trudged on, and I lost track of time, the sun inching lower in the sky. My father remained focused, scanning the terrain with an intensity that unnerved me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, as if unseen eyes tracked our movements from the shadows. Each time I turned, expecting to see a deer or a rabbit, all I found was emptiness. Eventually, we stopped near an old, gnarled oak tree that loomed larger than the others. It had been split down the center, a jagged wound exposing the rotting core. My father drew a deep breath, and I noticed a tremor, just a flicker of hesitation, in his hands as he reached for his rifle. "Let's rest for a moment," he said, his voice dropping. "Keep your ears open." I nodded, scanning our surroundings with a mix of curiosity and dread. The quiet felt suffocating, and the shadows began to stretch like fingers reaching for us. My father's eyes darted to the right, and I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there, only the relentless trees and their haunting stillness. As the last light of day began to fade, a chilling howl pierced the air. It was not the call of a wolf, but something deeper, primal, laden with desperation. My heart raced, and I saw my father tense, his muscles coiling like a drawn bowstring. We exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Something was wrong. "Stay close," he advised, his voice low and steady. We resumed our trek, the sound of our boots crunching against the frost-laden leaves almost drowned out by the echo of that distant howl. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see whatever had made that sound. The forest felt alive, pulsing with a rhythm that was both thrilling and terrifying. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon something that stopped us cold. A clearing opened up, revealing the remnants of a campfire, the ashes still warm. Scattered around were tattered remnants of clothing, torn and dirted, as if someone had left in a hurry, or perhaps had been taken. My breath caught in my throat, and an icy dread settled in my gut. "Dad," I whispered, but he was already moving toward the fire, his eyes scanning the area. He crouched beside the ashes, inspecting the area, and I felt a mix of fear and curiosity pulling me closer. But I hesitated, the gnawing sensation of being watched returning with a vengeance. I heard something shift behind me, a low rustle that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father straightened, the look on his face grave, and then nodded slowly. "We need to go, now." Just as we turned, a shadow darted between the trees, quick and sinuous. My heart pounded in my chest as fear climbed up my throat. Whatever it was watching us, stalking us. In our hunt for game, we had become the hunted. My father motioned for silence, and we moved as one, the thrill of fear coursing through me. I felt the weight of the forest bearing down as we hurried back the way we had come, the shadows deepening in the encroaching twilight. The owl echoed again, closer this time, and we quickened our pace, the deep thrum of my pulse drowning out the sounds around us. I knew one thing: the woods held dark secrets, and some tales, no matter how chilling, were rooted in reality. I could only hope we wouldn't become part of one of those stories, lost among the trees, swallowed whole by the darkness that cared not for the bounds of man. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the forest floor. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my heart hammering wildly in my chest. The day's warmth was fading quickly, replaced by an eerie chill that seeped through my clothes. I had always relished the thrill of the hunt, but this was different. This was a hunt with no rules, no guarantees. As I scanned the trees, I remembered the stories my grandfather had told me, tales of hunters who had vanished without a trace in these woods. Each account felt like a whisper of warning, a chilling reminder woven into the fabric of the very forest I stood in. I shook my head, dismissing the specters of childhood fears that lingered in the back of my mind. Earlier in the day, I had journeyed deeper into the woods than usual, seeking the thrill of tracking my prey. Alone, I had felt invigorated, the dense foliage swallowing the sound of my footsteps, the air rich with the scent of pine and earth. But now, as darkness enveloped me, the woods transformed. The tranquil serenity morphed into a palpable tension, an unsettling silence punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lone owl. I recalled the moment I had found that strange clearing, the remnants of an old campfire, and the odd markings carved into the trees. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now a knot tightened in my stomach. I had dismissed the local stories about the disappearances as folklore, legends designed to scare children. I had never imagined they were rooted in something real. The forest creaked around me, and I felt like I was being watched. I turned, half expecting to find a figure lurking in the shadows, but there was only the whisper of the wind through the branches. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. The hunt wasn't over yet. I had come too far to turn back now. Yet the deeper I ventured, the more I sensed that something was off. I pressed on, my senses heightened. Just ahead, I spotted a flash of movement. My pulse quickened as I crouched low, instinctively blending into the underbrush. It was a deer, its coat shimmering in the fading light. My heart raced as I gripped my bow tighter, but then I hesitated. An unease swirled in my gut. The deer was acting strangely, its ears flicking back nervously, eyes wide with fear. As if it sensed my presence, the deer bolted, darting away into the thicket. I rose from my crouch, a sense of urgency propelling me to follow, though doubt gnawed at my resolve. I took a few steps into the dense undergrowth, but something stopped me. An unnatural stillness had replaced the usual sounds of the forest. No rustling of leaves, no chirp of crickets. Just silence, thick and suffocating. I turned back the way I had come, but the path seemed to twist and close in on itself. The trees loomed taller, their bark resembling gnarled faces in the dim light. Panic surged through me as I realized I could no longer see the familiar landmarks. It was as if the forest had shifted, reshaping itself while I wandered. I took a breath, fighting the rising tide of fear. Recalling my grandfather's teachings, I tried to stay calm. The trick was to move decisively, to trust my instincts, yet every direction felt wrong. As I turned, my foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling forward. I landed hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. As I picked myself up, I noticed something glinting a few feet away. It was a knife, weathered and partially buried in the damp earth. I picked it up, the cold metal sending a shiver down my spine. Whoever had been here before hadn't left it behind willingly. The thought made the hair on my arms stand on end. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out at me. The air thickened with a sense of dread as the trees whispered in the wind, sorrowful and accusatory. I needed to get out. The knife felt heavy in my hand, a reminder that I was not alone in this place. I turned, ready to retrace my steps. That's when I heard it, a low growl, muffled yet distinct, reverberating through the silence. My instincts kicked in, adrenaline flooding my veins as I crouched low again. I strained to listen. The sound came again, closer this time, reverberating through the underbrush. It was not the sound of a deer, not of any animal I knew. It was primal, filled with a malice that sent a jolt of terror through me. I had to move. I turned, running deeper into the woods, heart pounding in my ears. The path twisted again, branches clawed at my clothes as if trying to hold me back. I stumbled, my breath coming in desperate gasps. Behind me, I heard the growl once more, now mingled with the sound of something crashing through the underbrush, gaining on me. Panic turned to clarity. I had to find a way out, a way to escape whatever hunted me. As I ran, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, watching, waiting for the moment I faltered. I pushed forward, the darkness closing in around me, every instinct screaming that I needed to survive, to evade whatever lurked in the shadows. And then I saw it, a glimpse of light filtering through the trees ahead, a flicker of hope, a promise of safety. I sprinted toward it, my feet pounding against the ground, praying it wasn't another illusion of the forest. The growl behind me intensified, a reminder that the hunt wasn't over yet, and I was still the prey. The air in the woods had grown thick, heavier than the early morning mist that clung to the ground. Every sound reverberated through the silence, the gentle rustle of branches and the distant cry of a bird echoing like a warning in my ears. I had expected the hunt to be exhilarating, a chance to bond with my father in a way I had only read about in books. Yet, something felt wrong, as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something sinister to unfold. I pulled the collar of my jacket tighter around my neck, wishing I had listened to my instincts and insisted we head home after my father's strange stories last night. He had spun tales of the whispering woods, where hunters vanished, swallowed whole by the darkness. I thought he was embellishing for effect, but now, as I walked alongside him down the narrow path, the shadows seemed to loom closer, their edges curling in on themselves like hungry mouths. "Stay close," my father said, his voice low. I nodded, though a shiver ran through me. I had never seen him like this, his eyes darting around, as if the trees hid threats just out of sight. I wondered if he had seen something I hadn't, something that might convince me to turn back. The deeper we went, the more the landscape shifted. The trees grew taller, their gnarled roots wrapping around rocks like ancient sentinels. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting mild patterns on the forest floor. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing down, an oppressive presence that suffocated the last remnants of the day's warmth. "We'll set up the camp here," my father said, gesturing to a small clearing. I glanced around, unease gnawing at me. There was an unnatural stillness, a profound quiet that suggested we were no longer alone. The birds had stopped singing, and the rustling of leaves was reduced to an eerie whisper. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. As he gathered firewood, I moved closer to the tree line, drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain. The trees felt alive, their bark seemed to pulse, and I could almost hear them breathing. My heart raced as I pressed deeper, compelled by a curiosity that felt dangerously close to folly. Then, I saw a tattered piece of fabric caught on a branch, fluttering like a ghostly banner. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the coarse material. It was dark, stained, and I felt a deep chill travel through my bones as I realized it wasn't just old fabric, it was a part of someone's clothing. I stumbled back, a sense of dread washing over me. My father's storytelling had crossed from mere tales into something tangible, and the last vestiges of my thrill had evaporated. "Jake." My father's voice snapped me from my reverie. I turned to see him standing at the edge of the clearing, eyes wide with concern. "What are you doing over there?" "I found something," I said, my voice trembling. He hurried over, and I pointed to the fabric, my throat dry with fear. His face paled as he knelt beside it. "This isn't good," he muttered, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees. "We need to move." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stood abruptly, his gaze darting between the trees. "Because we're not alone here, Jake. Not everyone who wanders these woods comes back." Panic shot through me like an arrow, and I knew then the stories were true. The woods were alive with something other than nature, something malevolent. I felt the urge to run, to flee from this cursed place, but my father grabbed my arm, his grip ironclad and urgent. "Follow me," he instructed, pulling me away from the clearing. "Stay close." We moved quickly, a desperate escape from the unseen presence lurking in the shadows. Every snapped twig underfoot felt amplified, a loud crack in the thick silence that surrounded us. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else, as dread coiled tightly in my stomach. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a small, decrepit cabin, half consumed by the forest. It looked abandoned, a relic of the past, but I felt a pull toward it, a strange sense of familiarity. My father hesitated at the door, glancing back at the trees, almost as if he expected something to emerge from the shadows. "Jake," he whispered, "we need to go inside. We can't stay out here." I didn't want to enter the cabin, but something in his voice, a mixture of fear and determination, compelled me to follow him. Inside, darkness enveloped us, the musty smell of decaying wood filling my lungs. My father pulled out a flashlight, illuminating the dust and cobwebs that coated the surfaces like a shroud. We huddled together in the middle of the room, the flickering beam casting monstrous shadows against the walls. A window broke the silence, rattling as the wind rushed through the trees outside, and I jumped at the sound. "What do we do now?" I asked, my throat tight. My father didn't answer. He had gone pale again, eyes wide as he stared into the darkness beyond our frail sanctuary. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding, when I heard it, a soft whisper, like the rustling of leaves but more distinct, a beckoning sound that curled around my mind. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, fear creeping into my voice. He nodded slowly, his expression one of grim understanding. "It's time to go, Jake. We need to move. Now." But as we reached the door, I felt it, a presence, heavier than the shadows, closer than the trees. My father hesitated, fear etched on his face. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, lurking just out of sight, waiting for us to make a mistake. He opened the door, and a gust of cold air rushed in, extinguishing the brief light from our flashlight. The darkness outside loomed, swallowing the world whole. "Run," he urged, and we bolted into the night, the woods alive with whispers as we tore through the underbrush, desperate to escape whatever haunted these woods. Whatever haunted us was out there, and I could feel its breath on my neck. The forest loomed like a dark secret, each towering tree casting elongated shadows that danced with the wind. I had always felt small among nature's grandeur, but this was different. Each step I took felt like a step deeper into a void where the laws of reality bent and twisted. The air was thick with the musk of decay, a scent that clung to my clothes and skin like a warning. The sun had hung low in the sky when I ventured out, its fading light stripped away by the canopy overhead. The tales my grandfather told me when I was a child came rushing back, each one laced with the kind of terror that made me shiver even in the summer heat. He spoke of hunters who had gone missing, swallowed whole by the woods, their cries echoing in the night. Even now, a chill cascaded down my spine as I recalled those chilling stories. I found myself tracing my earlier path, hesitant and unsure. My companions, Ryan and Jake, had fanned out, convinced that they could find whatever it was that had been prowling around our camp. They had mocked me when I suggested we should head back, brushing off my trepidations like leaves from their jackets. But as I walked, I wished more than anything I had insisted we return together. The forest was unnaturally quiet, a silence so oppressive that I could hear my own heartbeat. Every rustle of leaves sent shivers down my spine. I had only intended to follow Ryan and Jake for a few minutes, a little ways off the main path to see if I could catch a glimpse of their shadows, but now I felt utterly alone. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Then I heard it, a rustling, far off but unmistakable. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I crouched low, my breath hitching in my throat as I strained to listen. It was a low, guttural sound, like a growl but deeper, resonating through the very ground beneath me. I recalled the stories of the creature, the one that had stalked these woods for generations, a beast that preyed on the unsuspecting. "Ryan?" My voice trembled, barely escaping my lips. No response came, only the creeping dread that tightened around my chest. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the gloom for any sign of my friends. I could feel the shadows shifting, watching, waiting. Then I saw it, a flash of movement to my left, just beyond the thick underbrush. I took a cautious step forward, heart hammering in my ears, and called out again, "Jake?" But my voice cracked, swallowed by the oppressive silence. As I crept closer, I spotted something dark and heavy lying on the forest floor. I pushed through the brush, each step a battle against the rising panic. What lay before me made my stomach drop. It was Ryan's backpack, torn and stained, the contents strewn about like remnants of a forgotten life. My heart raced as I knelt, searching through the debris, half hoping to find him safe and sound. But deep down, the dread coiled. I knew that hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. My fingers brushed against something cold and slick, Ryan's hunting knife, its blade gleaming dully in the dim light. I recoiled, bile rising in my throat. Something had taken him, and whatever it was still here, lurking just out of sight. I staggered back, my mind racing. I had to find Jake. I had to get out of this damned forest. I turned on my heel and sprinted, branches clawing at my clothes, roots reaching up to trip me. I felt like a rabbit, panicking, running from a predator I could not see. As I dashed through the underbrush, I heard the growl again, louder this time, a menacing rumble that echoed through the trees. I skidded to a halt, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and pressed my back against a tree, trying to calm the whirlwind of fear inside me. The sound was close now, far too close. Jake. I whispered, hoping against hope. But the forest answered with silence. Panic surged anew as I realized I was lost. The trees closed in, each trunk looking the same as the last, each shadow teasing me with the promise of safety just out of reach. I pulled myself together, forcing my feet to move, yet it felt like I was running in circles. The growing realization that I was utterly alone settled in. I was prey in a land that thrived on fear. Suddenly, a rustle to my right made me freeze. This time, I didn't call out. I simply held my breath and listened. The sound grew closer, a low growl juxtaposed against the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I shifted my weight, ready to bolt in the opposite direction when the creature emerged from the shadows. It was not the beast from my grandfather's tales, nor was it a wild animal. It was something else entirely, tall, gaunt, and impossibly fast, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. My heart sank as I realized it was watching me, sizing me up. A sudden rush of dread seized me as the world around me blurred. I stumbled back, desperate for any escape, and in that moment of vulnerability, instinct took over. I turned and ran, trusting that some fragment of my mind knew the way back. With every step, the growl echoed in my ears, a grim reminder that I was now alone in this suffocating darkness. As I pushed through the underbrush, the creature pursued me, its breath hot on my neck. I screamed, a primal sound that pierced the veil of silence. The trees whispered secrets as I tore past them, their roots grabbing at my ankles, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't allow myself to be consumed. But as I stumbled forward, my foot caught on a hidden root, and I fell hard to the ground. Pain flared in my ankle, but I had no time to register it. I scrambled to my feet, glancing back just in time to see the beast emerge from the shadows, its mouth curled into a predatory snarl. With a final burst of adrenaline, I pushed forward, fighting against the pain radiating from my ankle. The forest opened up just ahead, and I could see the fading light of the campsite. I sprinted, heart racing, hoping against hope that I would make it back before it was too late. Behind me, I could hear the growl growing fainter but no less menacing, a reminder that in this place, the hunt was far from over. Story 4, Detour into the Abyss. The sun had just dipped below the horizon as we cruised down the deserted highway, the orange pink glow fading into a deep indigo. A cool breeze drifted through the open windows of our rusted-out Chevy, carrying with it the earthy scent of distant pine forests and the faint chill of nightfall. This was the kind of summer road trip we had always dreamed of, just my best friend Emma and me, leaving behind our mundane lives for a few days of freedom and adventure. We had decided to take the long route to Lake Silver, a spot we heard whispered about in the hushed tones of classmates, a hidden gem where the stars sparkled brighter than any city. The thrill of the open road was intoxicating. We blasted our favorite playlist, singing off-key and laughing like we were the only two people on the planet. But as the sun disappeared, an uneasy feeling crept into my chest. The radio crackled, dropping in and out of reception, and then it died altogether, leaving only the soft hum of the tires on asphalt. I glanced at Emma, who was now staring out the window, her brow furrowed, as if she felt it too, the heavy weight of isolation. "You okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. She turned to me, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long day of driving, you know?" I nodded, though I sensed there was more to it. The highway stretched ahead, flanked by dark woods that seemed to loom closer with each passing mile. The trees towered like ancient sentinels, their branches reaching out as if trying to grab hold of us. We had passed a few small towns, but now the road seemed to stretch endlessly with no signs of civilization. I should have checked the map again before we left. My phone buzzed ominously, but the screen only flashed no service. "Maybe we should stop and find a motel," I suggested, glancing at the clock on the dashboard at 10:47 p.m. "We can't stop now, we're almost there, right?" "Just a little further," Emma insisted, her grip tightening on the armrest. I didn't want to be the one to ruin the fun, but something gnawed at me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spotted a flicker of light through the trees, a dilapidated sign for an inn that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The paint was peeling and the windows were dark, but the light came from somewhere inside. I pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching against the stones. Emma hesitated but eventually followed me out of the car. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant chirping of crickets filled the silence. As we approached the entrance, the wooden door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit lobby. A flickering fluorescent light barely lit the room, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. A musty smell greeted us, as if the place hadn't seen a visitor in years. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing through the empty space. An old woman emerged from the back, her face lined with age and her eyes clouded. She wore a faded floral dress that looked like it belonged to another era. "Welcome, Tears," she croaked, her voice like gravel. "What brings you to this part of the woods?" "We were hoping to stay the night," I replied, my throat suddenly dry. "Just for one night." The woman's smile faded slightly as she studied us, her gaze lingering a beat too long. "Well, we don't get many visitors." "Is that a yes?" Emma asked, shifting nervously beside me. "Yes," the woman finally said, her smile returning but not reaching her eyes. "I'll get a room ready for you. It's right upstairs." As she turned to lead us, I exchanged a glance with Emma. There was a strange energy in the air, a tension that set my teeth on edge. We followed her up a rickety staircase, the wood creaking under our weight. The hallway was narrow, lined with doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. I half expected to see dust bunnies dancing in the dim light. "This will be your room," the woman said, gesturing to the door at the end of the hall. We stepped inside, and the musty scent hit us again, mingling with something I couldn't quite place. The room held a double bed, its sheets stained and wrinkled, a nightstand, and a small window overlooking the woods. "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. "Just come down for breakfast in the morning," she instructed, her voice softer now. "But don't wander too far. The woods can be unpredictable at night." With that, she left us, closing the door behind her with a heavy thud. I turned to Emma, who looked as uneasy as I felt. "Did that feel off to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," she replied, crossing her arms. "But it's just a place to sleep, right? We'll be fine." Yet as we settled into the uncomfortable silence of the room, I couldn't shake my anxiety. The woods outside loomed large and oppressive, their dark secrets hidden just beyond the window. I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, I wondered if we had made a terrible mistake. The road trip had promised adventure, but now it felt like we had stumbled into a nightmare. As the night deepened, the sounds of the woods intensified. I pulled a blanket over myself, trying to drown out the rustling outside, but sleep evaded me. I could swear I heard whispers, faint and indistinct, carried on the wind. And then, one sound cut through the night, a low growl that sent a jolt of fear straight to my core. The sun dipped below the horizon as we continued our journey down the desolate stretch of Highway 34. The sky morphed into shades of violet and deep orange, but the beauty of the sunset was lost on me. I kept glancing at the map on my lap, tracing the route with my finger, anxiety clawing at my insides. I had always loved road trips, the excitement of the open road, the promise of new experiences. But this time, something felt profoundly wrong. "Are we close?" Emily asked from the passenger seat, her voice a mix of weariness and hope. She had been drifting in and out of a light sleep, and I could see the fatigue etched on her face. I shot a quick glance at her before focusing back on the darkening road ahead. "About an hour, maybe a little more," I replied, though my heart sank, knowing we were in the middle of nowhere. The car's headlights flickered like a heartbeat against the encroaching darkness, illuminating the barren landscape that stretched endlessly on either side. Trees loomed like specters, their gnarled branches swaying gently in the increasing wind. The air felt charged, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. I felt it deep in my bones, a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. "Let's crank up the music," Emily suggested, reaching for the radio. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. But as she fiddled with the knobs, we were met with nothing but static and the occasional crackle. I frowned, twisting my own dial, but the same silence filled the air, interrupted only by the hum of the engine. "Great," I muttered, irritation creeping into my voice. I didn't want to sit in silence, especially not in a place like this. The isolation gnawed at me. "Let's just talk, then." "About what?" she asked, her eyes still glued to the road ahead. I thought for a moment, searching for a light topic to lift the mood. "Remember that time we got lost on that hiking trail back in Colorado?" I started, hoping to evoke a shared laugh. Emily smiled faintly, her memory drifting back. "Yeah, you thought you knew the way. We ended up on that cliffside." "Hey, I made it work," I defended, grinning at her. "We just had to follow the river back down." But as I spoke, the laughter faded into the back of my mind, overshadowed by an unsettling sensation creeping in. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just lost in the middle of nowhere. It felt more sinister, like we had crossed a threshold into something we couldn't see. As if on cue, the car began to sputter audibly, the engine struggling against the pressure of the night. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my heart racing. "What was that?" I asked, glancing at Emily. She looked as alarmed as I felt. "I don't know." "It's probably just the fuel," she said, though her voice trembled. "How much do we have left?" I glanced at the fuel gauge, and a wave of nausea washed over me. It hovered just above empty. Crap. We need to find a gas station soon. The shadows deepened around us, and my unease morphed into a palpable panic. I scanned the road ahead, searching for any sign of civilization. Nothing but blackness and the occasional flicker of a distant star greeted me. The landscape felt like it had been abandoned for ages, as if we were the last two souls clinging to life in a forsaken world. "I think I see something up ahead," Emily pointed, and my heart leaped. Could it be a station, a flickering light, a chance for salvation? I pushed down on the accelerator, squinting into the distance. As we approached, the shape of an old diner materialized, its neon sign buzzing intermittently. Relief flooded through me. I pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching against the stones. The diner stood like a ghost of the past, its chrome exterior dulled by time, the flickering sign reading open in desperate neon letters. "Let's get some gas," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the car. Emily followed, her steps hesitant as we made our way to the entrance. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A lone waitress stood behind the counter, her eyes glazed and distant, as if she were staring through the walls into some other time. The air was thick with the aroma of stale coffee and something else, something rotten, lurking under the surface. "Ah, hi," I called as we approached the counter. She blinked, slowly focusing on us. "Do you have gas?" "Through the back," she mumbled, her voice flat, as if the words were a chore. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Okay, thanks," I replied, glancing at Emily, who looked equally unsettled. We exchanged a brief, knowing glance. This place felt wrong, like a scene from a horror movie, where everything was off in ways one couldn't immediately articulate. "Let's just get the gas and go," she whispered, her voice low, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. I nodded, leading the way toward the back door. The dimly lit storage area was cluttered with old crates and rusty shelves. I spotted the gas pump nestled in the corner, but it was covered in layers of dust, and the sight sent a jolt of unease through me. As I stepped closer, a sharp noise echoed from behind the crates, a rustling, like something shifting within. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Emily, who had followed me in. "What?" she whispered back, her eyes wide and fearful. Before I could respond, another sound came from the shadows, a low growl that sent chills cascading down my spine. I turned to see movement, something dark and large creeping out from behind the crates. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her back toward the door. "Back. Now!" I shouted, adrenaline flooding my veins. We raced out of the storage area, the growling following us, reverberating through the walls like an omen of doom. As we stumbled out into the night, the neon sign flickering overhead felt like a taunt. The road stretched before us, empty and foreboding, but now we had a new urgency pushing us forward. We had to escape before whatever lurked in the shadows found us in the dark. I woke from a fitful sleep, the remnants of nightmares clinging to me like a damp fog. The cramped back seat of the car still smelt of stale coffee and sweat from the previous day's drive. I blinked against the morning light, filtering through the gap in the curtains of the window, wishing it would banish the shadows that clung to my mind. Sitting up, I realized that I was alone. The car was parked, but the familiar sights of the highway were replaced by the stillness of an empty roadside. My pulse quickened as I looked around, the air thick with a sense of abandonment. The sound of my own breath felt too loud in the silence. I rubbed my eyes, hoping to dispel the unsettling sensations lingering in the corners of my mind. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. It hadn't surprised me out here. The network was unpredictable at best. My companions, James and Claire, were nowhere in sight. A knot of worry tightened in my stomach as I swung my legs over the side of the seat and stepped out into the cool morning air. The landscape was desolate, the road stretching endlessly in both directions, flanked by dense trees that seemed to loom like silent sentinels. I called out for them, my voice echoing back as if mocking my concern. I wandered a few steps away from the car, scanning the horizon, the tension in my chest growing with each passing moment. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spotted them up ahead, a small diner tucked away in what I had thought was just a stretch of deserted road. It looked like something out of a movie, a relic of a bygone era, with a flickering neon sign that read open. The promise of warmth and coffee beckoned me. I hurried toward them, my gut twisting with unease. As I approached, I spotted Claire sitting on a weathered stool outside the diner, her head in her hands. James stood pacing nervously nearby, The scene felt surreal, a stark contrast to the ominous woods behind us. "Hey! What happened?" I called out, my voice a mixture of relief and concern. Claire looked up, her face pale and drawn. "You're awake. We thought you were never going to get up," she said softly, but her tone held an edge of panic. James ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around as though expecting something to leap from the shadows. "We've been waiting for you. You missed it." "Missed what?" Claire glanced at James, then back at me. "We heard something last night. It was terrible." I felt a chill snake down my spine, curiosity battling with dread. "What do you mean?" James finally stopped pacing and faced me. "We heard noises like someone crying. It was coming from the woods." I glanced back at the trees. They stood silent now, but I felt their watchful presence. "Crying?" "Yeah," Claire continued, her voice trembling. "At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it kept getting louder, almost like a person. I wanted to go and check, but James wouldn't let me." "Of course I wouldn't let you," he snapped, the tension snapping in the air. It didn't feel right. It felt wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to process their words. "Did either of you go out there?" "No!" Claire exclaimed, clearly exasperated. But it got to the point where it was like it was begging for help. I could almost hear it calling my name. The imagery painted a palpable fear in my mind, and I swallowed hard. "So, what do we do now?" James pointed toward the diner. "We need to figure out our next move. We can't stay here forever, but we're not going back out there." I nodded, sensing the urgency. We stepped inside the diner, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the dark atmosphere that had settled with us. The air smelled of grease and burnt coffee, oddly comforting. The interior was empty except for an elderly waitress shuffling behind the counter, her faded uniform a testament to years of service. She looked up with weary eyes as we entered, and a hint of a smile creased her lips. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice hoarse but warm. I nodded, grateful for the distraction, but my mind continued to whirl with possibilities. We each ordered a cup, and as we waited, we settled into a booth by the window. Outside, the trees swayed slightly in the breeze, their shadows flickering across the ground. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, hidden in the depths of the woods. As we sipped our coffee, I noticed a map spread out on the counter, the edges tattered and worn. "Do you have a bathroom?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Back that way," the waitress gestured, her eyes still distant as if she were somewhere else entirely. As I stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of a newspaper clipping tacked to the wall behind her. A chilling headline read about disappearances occurring along this very road. I felt my heart race, an instinctual dread creeping over me. When I returned to the booth, I shared what I had seen, the words tumbling out as I recounted the article. James's face paled as he leaned back, arms crossed tightly against his chest. Claire's eyes widened. "Do you think we really are in danger?" I didn't want to answer, but as I glanced out the window again, the shadows seemed darker, the trees more menacing. Outside, something moved in the distance, a flicker of motion, perhaps. Suddenly, the diner's door swung open with a creak, and a figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the bright morning light. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his clothes tattered and dirty. The atmosphere shifted, heavy and oppressive. The waitress seemed to recognize him, her smile fading. "What do you want, Ben?" He stepped closer to us, his eyes wild and frantic. "You shouldn't be here. You need to leave now." The warning hung in the air, an ominous premonition. The night wrapped itself around us like a suffocating shroud as I pulled the car onto an overgrown dirt path, half hidden by the encroaching trees. The GPS had long since lost its signal, its monotonous voice replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. I could feel Agatha's discomfort beside me, her fingers tapping nervously against her thigh. I had convinced her that this detour would lead us to something memorable, but as the shadows stretched longer and the path narrowed, I began to question my judgment. "Are you sure about this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might awaken something in the dark. "Trust me, it's just a shortcut," I replied, though my own unease gnawed at my gut. The thrill of the road trip had dimmed, leaving only a hollow sensation that echoed around us. We had spent the earlier part of the day driving through breathtaking vistas and picturesque small towns. Now, the excitement had faded into a palpable tension, thick enough to slice with a knife. I blamed myself for not sticking to the main road, the prospect of adventure tainted by the weight of our isolation. As we continued down the path, the trees closed in like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to clutch my car and pull us into the shadows. I glanced at Agatha. She was staring out the window, her expression a mixture of fear and fascination. I focused back on the road, telling myself that just a few more minutes would bring us to civilization. Then I saw it, a flicker of light through the trees. It was faint, almost like a beacon, and despite my instinct screaming to turn back, something compelled me to follow it. I turned off the engine and we sat in silence, the only sound the rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The light pulsed softly, beckoning us closer. "I don't like this," Agatha murmured, her voice trembling. "It feels wrong." I opened the door, the cool night air rushing in like a cold hand gripping my throat. "Let's just check it out. What's the worst that could happen?" I stepped into the darkness, the ground crunching beneath my shoes. I turned back to her. "You can stay here if you want." She hesitated, then nodded, though the apprehension was still etched on her face. "I'll just wait here, okay?" I walked toward the light, the beam flickering and dancing like a candle threatened by the wind. Each step felt heavier, the underbrush snatching at my ankles as I moved. The light grew brighter, and soon I could see a small clearing ahead, illuminated by an old lantern hanging from a crooked tree branch. What I found in the clearing chilled me to the bone, a makeshift campsite littered with discarded belongings. Torn tents, faded backpacks, and an old cooler lay half buried in the undergrowth. But what drew my gaze was the center of the clearing, a circle of stones, each one carved with strange symbols, their surfaces slick and glistening in the lantern light. I stepped closer, the air thickening around me as if the very atmosphere had come alive with whispers. The symbols were unrecognizable, their meanings lost to time, yet something in my gut told me they were meant to keep something at bay. "What did you find?" Agatha called, her voice breaking the oppressive silence. I turned to see her standing just at the edge of the clearing, her silhouette framed by the dense trees. "Just a campsite," I said, though I could feel my heart racing. "You should come see this." As she stepped forward, the lantern flickered violently, casting shadows that twisted and contorted on the stones. Agatha froze, her expression shifting to one of dread as if she sensed something ominous in the air. "Maybe we should go back," she suggested, her voice shaking. "Just one more look." I edged toward the stones, drawn as if by an unseen force. The air crackled, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I reached out to touch one of the symbols, my fingers brushing against the cold stone, and a jolt of energy shot through me, sending shockwaves of dread through my body. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the trees, reverberating through the clearing. Agatha gasped, and I turned to see her pale face illuminated by the lantern's glow. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, the growl deepened, transforming into a snarl that sent a primal fear surging through me. I could feel the ground vibrate as something moved in the darkness, something not human. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed Agatha's hand, pulling her away from the stones. "We need to go," I said urgently, dragging her back toward the car. The growl morphed into a series of guttural sounds, and I dared not look back. We barely made it to the car when something burst from the underbrush, a massive shape that lunged towards us, and I slammed the door shut just in time. My heart raced as I fumbled for the keys, the sounds of snapping branches and heavy breathing echoing around us. "Start the car! Start the car!" Agatha screamed beside me, her panic like a live wire. I finally found the ignition and turned the key. The engine roared to life, but the creature's shadow loomed closer. I threw the car into reverse, slamming my foot on the gas, and we shot backward down the dirt path, the trees whizzing past in a blur of dark shapes. As we sped away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The clearing vanished behind us, swallowed by the night, but the feeling of dread clung to me like a second skin. I didn't dare to breathe until we were back on the main road, the headlights piercing through the darkness. I focused on the asphalt, the familiar rhythm of the tires a small comfort against the chaos that had unfolded. What the hell was that? Agatha finally managed to breathe, her voice still laced with terror. "I don't know," I admitted, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The adrenaline was still pumping through me, but now it mingled with an unsettling realization. We had stumbled into something we couldn't understand, and what lurked in the shadows would not be so easily forgotten. With every mile we covered, the road stretched endlessly ahead, but I knew deep down that we had awakened something far more sinister than a simple campfire ghost story. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the highway as we drove deeper into the heart of nowhere. The landscape morphed into a blur of darkness, punctuated only by the occasional flickering streetlight or the distant glow of a farmhouse. I still struggled to shake off the oppressive weight of the unease that had settled in my stomach since we'd left the last gas station. The road stretched on, endless and unforgiving, and with every mile, the air grew thicker, filled with an unnameable tension. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, her fingers idly tapping against her thigh. A frown etched deep into her brow, and she kept glancing at the gas gauge, which hovered precariously close to empty. It was a gamble we took, thinking we could make it the next 50 miles to the town we'd seen on the map. I'd been so caught up in the excitement of our spontaneous road trip that I hadn't considered how desolate the landscape would become. "We should find a place to stop," Rachel finally said, breaking the oppressive silence. I nodded, my eyes scanning the looming darkness outside. "Yeah, I know. Just a little further. I thought we'd hit a town by now." Her sigh was a whisper of frustration. "We should have filled up at that last station. This was a bad idea." I didn't argue. I felt it too, the creeping dread that gripped my chest. The empty stretch of road ahead loomed like a mouth ready to swallow us whole. The night felt alive, vibrating with unspoken warnings that hung in the air. Just then, a flicker of light caught my eye. I squinted into the void, and there it was, a sign for a diner, its neon glow flickering like a heartbeat, a beacon in the darkness. Relief washed over me, and I pressed the gas pedal, directing the car toward the promise of warmth and safety. When we pulled into the lot, the diner appeared shabby, a relic of bygone days, its paint peeling and windows grimy. But it was open, and the thought of food and a respite from the relentless highway soothed my nerves. I killed the engine, and the silence settled around us like a thick fog. We stepped out, the chill of the night wrapping around us, and as we pushed through the heavy glass doors, the bell above chimed a hesitant welcome. The interior was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of frying oil and something sweet, maybe pie. A few scattered patrons occupied booths in the corners, their faces obscured by shadows. A waitress ambled over, her uniform wrinkled and her hair pulled back in a haphazard bun. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice a tired rasp. I glanced at Rachel. She raised an eyebrow, her unease mirrored in my own. "Just coffee for now," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "And a menu, please." As the waitress shuffled off, I looked around. The diner felt strangely claustrophobic, with oppressive dark wood paneling that closed in on us. I noticed the other patrons, 2 men at the counter, talking in hushed tones, and a woman in a booth, staring out of the window as if expecting someone. Rachel shifted in her seat, her leg bouncing nervously. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "We'll be fine. Just some coffee, and we'll hit the road again." The waitress returned with our drinks, setting them down with a clatter. "You folks just passing through?" she asked, her gaze piercing. "Yeah," I replied. "Just on a road trip." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You sure picked a lonely stretch to travel. Things can get strange out here at night." A shiver traced my spine. "Strange how?" She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You wouldn't be the first to stop by here late. Folks tend to disappear if they stray too far off the main road. Just a friendly warning." Rachel stiffened, and I could feel the tension between us spike. I forced a smile to mask my discomfort. "Thanks for the heads up. We'll be on our way soon." The waitress straightened, her eyes flickering to the window. "Well, just be careful. Trust your instincts." With that, she retreated, leaving us in a haze of unease. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter liquid burning down my throat. Outside, the night seemed to thicken, as if all the shadows had conspired against us. "Maybe we should just stay here for the night," Rachel said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied sharply, the thought of lingering in that oppressive diner sending a fresh wave of fear coursing through me. "We can't let fear dictate our choices. We'll just grab some food and go." The tension in Rachel's shoulders didn't ease, and as the minutes stretched on, my eyes kept darting to the window, where the darkness seemed to throb with a life of its own. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled, and a figure entered, silhouetted against the harsh neon light. A tall man, his face obscured by a worn baseball cap, stepped inside. His presence shifted the atmosphere, making it electric and charged. Everyone in the diner fell silent, their attention drawn to him. He approached the counter, exchanged a few quiet words with the men, and they all turned to look at us. I felt a chill run down my spine, and Rachel pulled her hand away, eyes wide. This was no ordinary road trip. I could feel the weight of something dark closing in, the tendrils of fear weaving tighter around my throat. I wanted to leave, to escape this place and the sinister air that clung to it, but I found myself frozen in place, a moth drawn to the flame of impending danger. As the man turned slightly, I caught a glimpse of his face, a gaunt, hollow expression, eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. And then, just like that, I understood. We weren't just passing through, we had stumbled into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The diner, with its flickering lights and tired patrons, felt like a trap closing in, and I realized that the road might have been the safer choice after all. Story 5, Endless Road, The Haunting of Route 66. The road stretched far beneath the fading light, a black ribbon weaving through the vast expanse of pine trees. I gripped the steering wheel of my old sedan, its engine humming a steady tune, while the world outside darkened into twilight. I had taken this route 100 times, yet something felt off. Maybe it was the way the shadows danced along the roadside, or the eerie silence that crept in as the sun dipped below the horizon. I had been driving for hours, having ventured out to visit my friend in a town that barely made it onto the maps. My hope was to catch up over some well-deserved beer, but the promise of a quiet night slipped further away as I watched the thickening darkness envelop the landscape. The radio flickered with static, and the occasional burst of music was drowned out by the unsettling quiet of the highway. I turned it off, feeling uneasy with the thought of anything breaking the stillness. As twilight gave way to night, my headlights cut through the growing gloom, illuminating patches of asphalt while shadows loomed at the edges of the road. The faint outlines of trees loomed like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. I flicked a glance at the clock on my dashboard. Almost 10. I cursed under my breath, realizing I had spent too much time at a rest stop, my growing impatience urging me to move faster. I focused on the road, but something flickered in the corner of my eye. I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see another vehicle behind me, but the dark expanse of the highway lay empty. I shook my head, chalking it up to fatigue. After a long day at work and hours of driving, my mind was playing tricks. I turned up the air conditioning, hoping to stay alert. The trees closed in as I drove further from civilization. I passed a few dilapidated farmhouses, their windows dark like hollow eyes watching me as I sped by. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. A chill crept down my spine, a warning whisper that I was entering an unwelcome territory. Then, I saw it, a figure standing a few hundred yards ahead, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I squinted, straining to make out what it was. It looked human, no more than a silhouette, swaying slightly in the night breeze. My heart raced. I slowed, unsure if it was safe to approach. In horror stories, the naive driver always stopped for a stranger. I didn't want to be that person. But I also couldn't just leave someone out there. I pulled over, my mind racing with a mixture of dread and concern. Could they need help? Was it a trick? The figure remained still, and I hesitated. It felt like an eternity, but I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I wasn't the type to turn my back on another human being. As I stepped out of my car, the sound of gravel crunching underfoot echoed through the night. The figure was closer now, and I could see it was a man, disheveled and wearing a tattered jacket. His hair hung in matted strands, obscuring his face, but I could see the glint of desperation in his eyes as he turned to me. "Help," he croaked, his voice hoarse. "Please. I need a ride." I took a cautious step closer, the anxiety knotting my stomach. "Where are you headed?" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if the trees themselves were listening. Just away from here." "I can't stay." The urgency in his voice pulled at me, but my instinct screamed at me to get back in my car. "I don't think that's a good idea. Are you all right?" He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not safe. You need to leave, now." I glanced back at my car. The engine hummed softly, the headlights casting long beams that seemed to cut through the night. "What do you mean?" I asked, unease creeping into my voice. "Something's out here," he said, taking a step closer. "Something is hunting people on this highway." "I saw," he faltered, swallowing hard. "You have to go. Please." A chill ran through me, chilling me to the bone. I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see shadows twisting into figures, lurking just beyond the light of my car. "I can't just leave you here." "You don't have a choice," he shouted suddenly, his voice rising, echoing into the dark. "If you stay, you'll be next. You have to drive." My pulse quickened. I took a step back, my instincts warring with the empathy urging me to help. Out of nowhere, a low rumble echoed in the distance, like thunder rolling through the hills, but the sky had been clear moments ago. I turned towards it, fear prickling at my spine. "Please," he pleaded again, his voice a desperate whisper now. "Please, just get out of here." Something shifted in the shadows, a flicker of movement that sent my heart racing. My gut twisted, the primal urge to flee clawing at my insides. I looked back at the man, torn between fear and a human instinct to help. But it had become clear. Something was wrong. The highway had already turned into a nightmare, the ghosts of the past lurking just beyond the road, and I could feel their breath on my neck. I rushed back towards my car, glancing over my shoulder one last time as I fumbled to open the door. The figure stood rooted in place, his eyes wide with terror. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing inside the silence, and within moments, I was speeding off into the darkness, leaving him behind, praying he was wrong, praying that I wouldn't regret my decision. The sun had dipped below the horizon, surrendering the sky to an oppressive darkness that felt almost alive. I had been on the road for hours, my car humming softly as I navigated the seemingly endless stretch of highway. The warmth of the day faded rapidly, replaced by an unsettling chill that snuck through the car's fence, making me shiver. The dim glow of the dashboard lights provided little comfort as shadows danced at the edge of my vision. I had left my old life behind, deciding it was time for a fresh start. But as night settled in, the isolation of the highway began to weigh heavily on my chest. The trees loomed on either side of the road, tall sentinels that seemed to watch and whisper secrets meant only for one another. The rhythmic thrum of the tires against the asphalt soon took on a disconcerting quality, as if the very sound was a prelude to something sinister. It was then that I noticed the faint outlines flitting in my peripheral vision, darting between the trees. I brushed it off as a trick of the mind, fatigue playing its familiar games. But an unsettling feeling wormed its way into my thoughts, urging me to look again. I focused on the dark woods, my heart quickening as I strained to see beyond the black curtain of night. Nothing. Just darkness. Yet the sense of being observed prickled at my skin. I sighed and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I needed to stop for gas soon, and my stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since early that morning. Half-heartedly, I scanned the horizon for signs of civilization. After what felt like an eternity, a flickering light broke through the gloom. I nearly slammed on the brakes in relief. A roadside diner, the kind you see in movies, promising warmth and sustenance, glowed in the distance. Pulling in, I parked beneath the flickering neon sign that read Jones Diner in shaky script. The yellow light seemed to repel the darkness, almost inviting me inside. As I stepped out of the car, the chill seeped into my bones, and a sense of dread washed over me. I shook it off, convincing myself I'd simply had enough of the road and its eerie surroundings. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The interior was just as I had imagined, a retro charm mixed with a touch of neglect. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and the smell of stale coffee permeated the air. A lone waitress stood behind the counter, her hair tied back in a tight bun. She looked up as I entered, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if sizing me up. "Evening," she greeted, her tone curt. I smiled, trying to shake off the discomfort of her scrutiny. "Hi, I'd like a coffee and a menu, please." "Coffee's all there is," she replied, motioning to a pot on the counter. With a weary nod, I poured myself a cup and settled onto a stool. The waitress returned, placing a small plate of stale donuts in front of me. "That's complimentary. Help yourself." I took a sip of the coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. As I chewed on a donut, I glanced around the diner. It felt empty aside from a few shadowy figures in the booths. My unease crept back, intensified by the feeling of being watched. I turned my gaze back to the waitress, and as she moved closer, her face fell into the soft light, revealing deep lines etched by years of worry. "Your car's parked out back?" she asked, her voice low. "Yeah," I replied, confused by her sudden intensity. "Why?" She hesitated, glancing towards the windows as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the darkness. "Just be careful. You never know who's lurking out there. Not everyone who walks in here leaves." A chill ran down my spine, and I tried to laugh it off. "Is that a common problem in these parts?" More common than you think, she said, her expression grave. Just trust your instincts. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. I smiled weakly, but my heart raced. I downed the rest of the coffee, the bitter taste now mixed with the urgency to leave. My instinct screamed at me to get back on the road, but another part of me was curious about the waitress's warning. As I stood to leave, the door swung open, and a gust of cold wind rushed inside. A man entered, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a battered hat. He scanned the diner, his eyes locking onto mine. I felt my breath hitch as something in his gaze sent alarm bells ringing in my head. He moved towards the counter, and an odd silence enveloped the room. The waitress's expression shifted, concern etched on her face. "Got a problem, stranger?" the man asked, his voice low and uninviting. I sensed tension crackle in the air. "Just passing through," I said, my throat dry. "Everybody's just passing through, don't you know?" he replied, a smirk curling on his lips. The room seemed to draw in closer, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to overhear. I quickly turned to leave, feeling the weight of their stares at my back. As I stepped outside, the chill intensified, the shadows around the car growing thicker. I hurriedly climbed into the driver's seat, the click of the lock sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. I fished my keys from my pocket, my hand shaking slightly, and I turned the ignition. The engine sputtered for a moment before roaring to life. As I pulled away from the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me from the darkness. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the man standing alone at the entrance, still watching as the diner faded into the night. My stomach churned. The road stretched ahead, and I pressed the gas, determined to put the unsettling encounter behind me. But the deeper I drove into the night, the louder my instinct screamed that I wasn't alone, and that whatever darkness clung to the edges of the highway was not finished with me yet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a bruised sky stained with shades of violet and gray. My breath hung in the air like a ghost, each exhalation a reminder that I was alive, but it felt more like I was walking in a dream, one where I couldn't wake up. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a black ribbon sneaking through the desolate landscape. I had been walking for hours, my feet sore and my mind racing with thoughts of the accident. The memory of the crash replayed in vivid detail, the screeching of tires, the blinding light, and the surreal stillness that followed. That moment had turned my world upside down, and now I was left stranded on this godforsaken road. My phone had died long ago, leaving me cut off from the outside world, and the only company I had were the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures rustling amidst the underbrush. The first few cars had passed me without slowing down, their headlights illuminating my path only briefly before disappearing into the night. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of the highway, invisible and forgotten. As I trudged on, my thoughts drifted back to my friends. I had promised them a weekend trip, a chance to escape the grind of reality, but that promise felt shattered now, broken like the pieces of glass that had danced around me in the aftermath of the crash. A chill swept through the air, heavier than before. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and quickened my pace, hoping to find a semblance of safety up ahead. I had seen a gas station marked by a flickering neon sign a few miles back, and all I could think about was getting there. I imagined warm coffee and a kind smile from the clerk behind the counter, a brief connection to remind me that I wasn't completely alone in this world. As I moved forward, I noticed the shadows growing longer and deeper, creeping along the edges of the road. My heart raced, unfound fears awakening in the pit of my stomach. There was something unsettling about the silence, the way the world felt still, as if it held its breath. I could hear my own footsteps, the crunching of gravel underfoot, but no other sounds penetrated the thick night air. Then I heard it, a low rumble in the distance, the unmistakable sound of an engine. I turned my head instinctively, hope flaring in my chest. A set of headlights appeared in the distance, hurtling toward me with blinding speed. I raised my arm, waving frantically. The car swerved violently, then slowed as it approached, finally coming to a stop beside me. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a face partially obscured by the shadows. My heart raced. It could be a salvation or a threat. "Need a ride?" the driver asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. I glanced around, my instinct screaming at me to be cautious. "Yeah, I..." "Get in then," he interrupted, his tone flat. He leaned back in his seat, revealing more of his form, a wiry man with unkempt hair and dark circles beneath his eyes. Against my better judgment, I climbed into the back seat. The smell of old cigarettes and something sour filled the air, making my stomach churn. "Thank you," I managed, trying to mask my unease. "Where to?" he asked, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Just to the nearest town, please. There's a gas station, or anywhere really." "Sure." He nodded curtly, his focus unwavering. As we resumed our journey, I attempted to make small talk, to bridge the chasm of silence that hung between us. "Do you often drive this road?" He grunted, his fingers gripping the steering wheel like a vice. "Sometimes." His nonchalance sent shivers down my spine. I shifted in my seat, glancing at the darkened woods lining the highway. The trees seemed alive, their gnarled branches reaching out as if they wanted to snatch me back into their depths. Anxiety prickled at my skin, and I stole another glance at my driver. "Have you seen anyone else out here?" I asked, desperate to fill the void. "I was in an accident earlier." He flicked his eyes to the rearview mirror, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "You're lucky I found you. People can get lost on these roads." "What do you mean?" "Just that these roads don't let go of their secrets." His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I stifled a shiver, my instinct screaming at me to open the door and leap out. "I just want to get home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Home? A dangerous place to be." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. The headlights illuminated a sign, a rusted, faded marker that proclaimed last gas for 50 miles. Panic welled in my chest. "Wait, isn't the gas station just up ahead?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "There's nothing but darkness ahead. You don't want to go there." Before I could respond, a loud thump echoed from the trunk, a sound that sent my heart racing. "What was that?" I whispered, shrinking back against the seat. The driver's eyes glinted in the dim light, shadows dancing across his face. "Just some cargo. Nothing you need to worry about." The darkness closed in around us, and I felt suffocated. The landscape blurred past, a dark kaleidoscope of trees and shadows, and I had the sinking feeling that whatever was in that trunk was not nothing. My instinct screamed for me to leap from the car, to escape this nightmare, but with each passing mile, I felt more trapped. I was just a passenger, a plaything in this twisted game, and it was clear the road, this highway, was hungry for more than just secrets. The road stretched endlessly before me, an unyielding serpent winding through the shadows of the encroaching woods. My headlights pierced the darkness, casting long, trembling fingers of light onto the cracked asphalt. The temperature had dropped significantly, and with it, a bone-deep chill settled over me as I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the slight tremor in my hands. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't escape the sense that the highway had become a living thing, breathing in sync with my rising dread. I had been driving for hours, lost in thought and haunted by the remnants of a day I desperately wanted to forget. My mind drifted back to the accident. One moment, a brilliant flash of light, an impact that shattered glass and flesh. The next, silence, punctuated only by my ragged breathing. I found myself staring at the passenger seat, vacant and still. Emily's laughter echoed in my mind, a haunting melody, Now it was gone, swallowed by the night. The radio crackled in and out of static, struggling to find a station as if even the music sensed my turmoil. I fiddled with the knob, desperate for distraction. Instead of calming tunes, I stumbled upon a local news report. More sightings reported along Highway 37, the voice said, steady yet tinged with urgency. Witnesses described bizarre figures lurking just off the side of the road, their movements erratic and disjointed. If traveling tonight, proceed with caution. A shiver ran down my spine, and I shut off the radio. I didn't need to hear warnings. The night itself felt like a warning, pressing down, heavy and suffocating. In an effort to shake it off, I focused on the road ahead, squinting against the shadows that danced at the edges of my headlights. Minutes turned into an hour, the monotony of the highway lulling me into a trance. Just as I was beginning to think I might make it home, the headlights illuminated something that made my heart race. A figure stood off to the side of the road. I jerked the wheel, instincts taking over. The tires screeched, and I skidded to a stop, gravel crunching beneath the weight of the vehicle. I peered through the windshield, squinting against the glare of the headlights. The figure was a man, ragged, with clothes that looked like they had been torn from the very fabric of the night. He raised a hand, swaying slightly, and in that moment, the air thickened with an unspoken tension. As I lowered the window a crack, my heart pounded like a war drum. "Help, please," the man's voice came out hoarse, a whisper laced with desperation. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes were wild, darting nervously as he stumbled closer. "They're coming for me. You have to help me." Every instinct screamed at me to drive away, to ignore the pleas and keep moving. But something in his gaze anchored me, an unsettling desperation that matched my own fear. "What do you mean? Who's coming?" He glanced over his shoulder, eyes wide with terror. "They're out here. They'll take you too." I was about to tell him to get back when I noticed something shift in the darkness behind him, a shape, undulating like smoke, darker than the surrounding night. My blood turned to ice, and I instinctively turned the key, the engine roaring to life. "Get in. Quick." I shouted, not fully aware of my own urgency. The man hesitated for a heartbeat before lunging toward the passenger door, collapsing inside just as I slammed it shut. I accelerated, the tires screeching as I swerved back onto the highway, my pulse racing in time with the revving engine. "Did you see it?" he gasped, his breath quickening as he turned to look back. "It was right behind me." "What was?" I asked, forcing my eyes on the road ahead, but a part of me couldn't resist the urge to glance back. The stretch of highway behind us was empty, darkened by the encroaching trees, and yet I felt a pressure in my chest, a heaviness that seemed to seep from the very pavement under my tires. The thing that he began, but his voice faltered, a tremor of fear cutting through his sentence. I didn't want to hear it, yet I found myself urging him on. "What thing? What did it look like?" He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the side mirror. "It moves like a person, but it isn't. There's no face. Just shadows that shift and twist." I swear it was reaching for me. I pressed the gas, the engine roaring as the speedometer climbed, but I felt trapped. The horror of the night was creeping in, making the air thick and suffocating. "You're safe now," I said, though I couldn't shake the feeling that safety was just an illusion. As I drove, the shadows among the trees seemed to pulse, dark shapes flickering just out of view. The man next to me muttered under his breath, a mantra of fear that seeped into my own thoughts. "It can't find us. It won't find us." But I was beginning to realize that it wasn't just a man's fear that was palpable. It was something else, an unseen presence lurking just beyond the headlights, watching, waiting. The trees seemed to lean closer, and for a moment, I imagined I could hear whispers carried on the wind. I tightened my grip on the wheel, knuckles white as I refused to look back. Whatever haunted this highway was tied to the night, and deep down, I feared it could sense my fear. The road bent ahead, a sharp curve that led deeper into the dark woods, and as the headlights caught the edge of the trees, I swore I saw them shift. "Don't look," the man screamed, his voice high-pitched with panic. But it was too late. I glanced to my left, heart hammering as shadowy shapes flitted in and out of view. My breath caught in my throat as terror washed over me, paralyzing and consuming. There were figures, too many to count, dark forms standing still and waiting. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching to a halt, the car jolting as I came to a sudden stop. The trees loomed over us, and silence fell like a heavy blanket, pressing down with oppressive weight. "Drive," he yelled, his terror spilling into my own. "We have to go." I cursed under my breath, slamming the gear into drive as I tore down the road. Speeding into the night, I could feel the darkness slithering around us, and no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were simply running in circles, trapped in the nightmare of Highway 37. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of petrichor and something else, something sweet and rotten. I had barely slept, tossing on the unforgiving motel bed, images of the night before flashing in my mind like a broken projector. Roadside signs blurred together, a cacophony of warnings and reminders of life, but every flickering light felt like a taunt. It was just past dawn when I finally dragged myself out of bed. The world outside was muted, the sun hidden behind clouds that threatened rain. I dressed quickly, my fingers fumbling with buttons, my mind still clouded by fatigue and dread. I stumbled outside, feeling the chill of the damp morning air wrap around me. The gravel crunched underfoot, the sound oddly amplified in the silence. I glanced at the highway as I approached my car. The road stretched ahead, dark and dismal, a serpent of asphalt coiling into the distance. I shivered, remembering the feeling of being watched, the sensation that had crept over me during the drive. I was supposed to feel safe now, the danger behind me, but the thought of that man lingered in my mind. I could still picture his shadowy figure, his eyes glinting like shards of glass. I climbed into the driver's seat, feeling a surge of relief as the familiar contours enveloped me. I took a moment for composure, breathing in the scent of the worn leather and stale air. I had to focus. I had to get moving. As I turned the key, the engine roared to life, shattering the stillness. I pulled out onto the highway, the tires crunching against the gravel of the parking lot. I took one last look at the motel, wondering if it truly was as innocuous as it seemed. The road was empty, the early hour still keeping most travelers at bay. I drove on, hoping the distance would dilute the memory of the night's terror. Yet, as the miles rolled by, unease settled back in. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights creeping up behind me or that man's face peering through the glass. An hour passed without incident, but the landscape transformed from the flat plains into dense forest. The trees loomed on either side like ancient sentinels, dark and brooding. My speed crept higher, desperate to leave the woods behind, but the road twisted and turned, the curse inviting me deeper into the shadowy embrace. I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. Suddenly, a sense of urgency clawed at my chest. I reached for my phone, hoping to distract myself with a podcast or music, but the screen remained stubbornly black. No service. My heart sank. Just as the fear began to settle in my bones, I noticed something in the distance. A flicker of movement, a figure standing at the roadside. My breath hitched. I slowed down, apprehension rising. As I approached, the figure resolved into a woman, her clothes tattered and dirty. She waved desperately, a plea for help. My instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to ignore the potential trap, but her expression seemed genuine. Her eyes were wide, filled with panic. A survivor of this horror. I couldn't just leave her behind. I pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. The woman staggered closer, her face pale. "Please," she gasped, "you have to help me. They're coming." The urgency in her voice sent a chill down my spine. "Who is?" I asked, afraid of the answer. "The ones in the woods. They took my friend." I ran. "Please, you have to get me out of here." Before I could respond, I heard a distant rumbling sound, like thunder rolling in from afar. The woman's eyes widened further, and she grabbed the handle of my passenger door. "We have to go now." I hesitated, replaying the countless stories I'd heard about people lured into danger under false pretenses. But the sound grew louder, and with it, a growing dread seeped into my gut. I unlocked the door and she climbed in, the smell of damp earth and sweat flooding my car. "Drive," she gasped, and I shifted into gear, my heart racing as I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The sound intensified, a chorus of chaos erupting from the woods. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadows spilling from the trees, but all I could see was the encroaching blackness of the forest. "What are they?" "They hunt at night," she replied, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I don't know what they are, but they're not human." I tried to focus on the road, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. The forest pressed in on both sides, dark and impenetrable. The weight of her words settled heavily in the car. "What did you see?" "Just shadows and eyes." "They followed us," she whispered, glancing back toward the woods. I thought I was safe, but then her voice trailed off, and I could see the panic rising again. I turned my focus back to the asphalt. "We'll be fine," I assured her, though the tremor in my voice betrayed my own doubts. Then, without warning, a shadow darted across the road ahead, a blur of movement that sent my heart into my throat. I swerved, adrenaline fueling my reflexes. "What the hell was that?" "Just keep going," she shouted, her eyes wide with terror. The engine roared as I pressed down harder on the gas, the car hurtling forward. The trees began to close in even more, as if the forest itself conspired to swallow us whole. The shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and every rustle of leaves sent spikes of fear racing through me. I glimpsed something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing at the roadside, and I screamed, "Look out!" But it was too late. The car veered off course as I lost control, and everything went black. Story 6, Detour into the Forgotten. It started as a simple road trip, just me and my best friend, Alex. We had mapped out our route to the coast, the promise of sun and surf looming over us like a beacon. The last week of summer felt like an open invitation to escape our mundane lives, and I was ready to dive headfirst into adventure. Little did I know, it would be an escape into something far more sinister. The tires of my old sedan hummed against the asphalt, the high-pitched whine melding with the wind whipping through the open windows. We sang along to our favorite songs, punctuating each chorus with laughter, the air thick with anticipation. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the landscape shifted from bustling towns to sprawling fields, the horizon breaking into bursts of green and gold. It was breathtaking, and with each passing mile, I felt a weight lift from my chest. We stopped for gas a few hours in, the station a crumbling remnant of a time long gone. Faded signs flickered overhead, and the attendant, an older man with a weathered face, offered no smile as I filled up the tank. While Alex rummaged through the convenience store, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The old man's gaze lingered, his eyes dark pools of suspicion. I didn't think much of it then. Perhaps I had watched too many horror movies. Back on the road, we drove in silence for a spell. The car's radio buzzed with static, the playlists now abandoned in favor of the ambient sounds of the world outside. Fields turned to dense woods, and I felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches stretching out like skeletal fingers against the fading light. A chill swept through the car, uninvited and unwelcome. "Hey, do you think we should stop somewhere for the night?" Alex finally blurted, his voice jarring me from my reverie. I hesitated. "We've still got a couple of hours until the coast, right?" "Yeah, but it's getting late. I'd rather find a cheap motel than drive in the dark." I glanced at the setting sun, its vibrant colors bleeding into one another. The road stretched ahead, nearly empty, and the idea of abandoning our plans felt wrong. Still, my instinct told me to heed his suggestion. "All right, just a quick stop." I turned the wheel, looking for any sign of a nearby town. After a few minutes of navigating obscure dirt roads and an overwhelming sense of isolation, we stumbled upon a dilapidated motel. The neon sign flickered, its light dim and struggling, spelling out vacancy in an almost sarcastic tone. I parked, and we stepped out, the air thick with an unsettling quiet. A sense of foreboding washed over me. The building, with its peeling paint and sagging roof, seemed to sag under its own weight. The office door creaked open as we approached, revealing a small, dark room with a tattered reception desk. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her features obscured by the dim lighting. "Help you?" she rasped, her voice dry as if it hadn't been used in years. "Yes, we need a room for the night," I said, attempting to keep my tone light. Her eyes pierced through the darkness, and I felt an involuntary shiver crawl down my spine. "Only one room left," she replied, her smile stretching too wide, revealing teeth that looked unnaturally sharp. $75. I exchanged a glance with Alex, who looked equally uneasy, but we nodded in unison. We had no other options. After paying, she handed me an ancient key attached to a faded plastic tag. "Room 3. Down the hall and to the left. You'll want to lock the door tight, dear." Her words hung in the air, unsettling and cryptic. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the discomfort as we turned away. Room 3 was just as uninviting as the office, dusty, cold, and with the stench of mildew lingering. The bed sagged in the middle, and the wallpaper seemed to be peeling away in protest. I shuddered but tried to convince myself it was just a place to lay our heads for the night. "Let's order some food," Alex suggested, his voice strained, and I nodded in agreement. We pulled out our phones, only to find no signal. A wave of anxiety washed over me, but I brushed it aside. We'd have to make do with whatever we could scrounge up at the gas station. After a tense silence, we ventured back down the dimly lit corridor, the air feeling heavier with each step. The woman was still behind the desk, her eyes flickering up from an old book as we approached. "Any chance you have a menu?" I asked, forcing a polite smile. "No food here, only the vending machine," she answered, her eyes glinting strangely. "Might want to check your lock with it. It's been known to malfunction." I couldn't decipher her tone, but unease nodded me. I led Alex to the vending machine, a rusted hulk of metal that looked older than time itself. After a couple of coins dropped with a clatter, we heard a creaking noise from behind us. Turning, I saw the woman had reappeared in the doorway, her expression a mask of unnatural calm. "You'll want to make sure you don't leave anything behind when you go," she said, her voice unnervingly low. "Yeah, of course." I forced a laugh, though it felt hollow. The weight of the night settled around us as we trudged back to our room, the ominous shadows curling along the walls. I fumbled with the key, my hand shaking slightly, and pushed the door open, the creak echoing in the stillness. Alex turned on the small lamp, its feeble light barely illuminating the space. As we settled in, an unsettling thought clawed at my mind. Something was wrong with this place, and the woman's words felt like a warning I couldn't fully comprehend. The night stretched on, thickening with dread as the darkness beyond the walls grew deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not just passing through, but being watched, tangled in something we had yet to understand. The drive seemed endless, a blurry stretch of asphalt bordered by dark, dense trees that loomed over us like silent watchers. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a shroud of twilight over the road. I could feel the familiar tension creeping into the car, thickening the air between us. It had been just 3 hours since we left the city, but the distance felt like an eternity as the memories of our last stop haunted me. Lila, sitting in the passenger seat, had her headphones on, seemingly lost in her music. She always had a knack for tuning out the world around her, and tonight I envied her ability to escape. She had been my best friend since childhood, and I trusted her implicitly, but there was something off in the way she had been acting since we crossed into this desolate stretch of highway. Her carefree laughter from earlier was a distant echo now, replaced by a nervous silence that gnawed at my insides. I glanced at the gas gauge, a cruel reminder that we were due for a stop soon. Lila's eyes flickered to the dashboard but quickly returned to the darkened window. "You okay?" I asked, hoping to break the tension. "Yeah, fine," she replied without looking at me, her voice flat. I shook my head and focused on the road ahead. The headlights illuminated the endless stretch of pavement, revealing patches of fog that clung to the ground like lost souls. We had taken a detour to avoid traffic, and in my gut, I knew it was a mistake. The map had shown a small town ahead, a perfect place for gas and food, but as the minutes dragged on, the trees seemed to close in, squeezing the life out of the fading light. "Are we even going the right way?" Lila finally asked, pulling her headphones down to her neck. Her voice was edged with concern, and I could see her body tense as she peered out into the void surrounding us. "Yeah, there's a town coming up," I reassured her, though my heart raced with doubt. "It should be just a few more miles." The car's engine hummed steadily, but the rhythmic sound felt ominous, a betrayal against the stillness outside. Just as I was about to voice my unease, the headlights caught a flicker of movement at the edge of the road. I slammed the brakes, skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder as I squinted to see what it was. "What?" Lila exclaimed, jerking forward in her seat. A figure loomed at the side of the road, shrouded in shadow. I could make out a silhouette, tall, gaunt, and swaying slightly as if struggling against an unseen force. My heart pounded in my chest. Every survival instinct screamed at me to drive on, but something compelled me to stay put. "Well?" Lila demanded, her voice sharp with panic. "What are you doing?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the figure took a step closer. The headlights cast a ghostly glow on its face, and what I saw made my stomach twist. The skin was pale, stretched tightly over bone. The eyes, dark and sunken, seemed to bore into my very soul. "Drive, Alex. Now!" Lila's command snapped me back to reality. I stepped on the gas, and the tires kicked up gravel as we sped away from the haunting figure. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of it standing still, watching us disappear into the darkness. The silence in the car was deafening, thick with unspoken fear. Lila glanced back at me, her eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I stammered, gripping the wheel tighter. I thought it might be someone in trouble." "Someone in trouble? Are you serious? That looked like a ghost or something." I could hear her voice rising, panic lacing her words, and I felt my heart race again. What had I been thinking? I had put us both in danger. The road ahead felt like a trap, each passing moment tightening the invisible noose around us. "Just keep driving," she said finally, her tone less frantic but still shaky. "Just get us out of here." I nodded, focusing my attention on the road, but it was hard to shake off the image of that figure. The fear settled into my bones, a cold dread that refused to let go. I switched on the radio to ease the silence, but the static hissed back at me like a warning. A few miles later, my hope surged as I spotted a flickering light in the distance. There. A gas station. I almost shouted, relief washing over me. As we rolled into the gravel driveway, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. But the feeling was short-lived. The station was dark, the neon sign flickering erratically, casting eerie shadows against the cracked pavement. "Hello?" I called out as I stepped out of the car, my voice swallowed by the encroaching darkness. "Anyone here?" Lila hesitated, peering through the glass doors, her eyes darting around nervously. "I don't like this, Alex. Can we just leave?" "Just a quick stop," I insisted, pushing open the door. It creaked ominously, echoing into the emptiness. Inside, a faint smell of stale coffee and dust hung in the air. The shelves were lined with old snacks and drinks, but not a soul was in sight. I walked down the aisles, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. Maybe they're just closed? I muttered, trying to convince myself there was nothing wrong. But something prickled at the back of my mind, a sense of being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I turned to find Lila standing at the entrance, her face pale as she stared at something behind me. "Alex, turn around," she whispered, hardly able to form the words. I spun, my heart racing again. A figure stood at the back of the store, obscured by shadows, watching us with those same sunken eyes, and I felt the ground beneath me give way. In that moment, the world narrowed to the sound of my heartbeat, pounding in my ears like a drum, drowning out all rational thought. Suddenly, I understood why it had been so quiet on the road. Something had followed us here. The road stretched endlessly before us, a narrow ribbon of asphalt flanked by towering pines that seemed to leer down at our car. The sun hung low in the sky, bleeding its light into the horizon like a bruise. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The radio crackled uselessly, the static almost a sentient presence in the car, mocking us with its silence. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Lisa asked, her voice barely cutting through the din of the ambient noise. She shifted in her seat, casting a furtive glance at the map sprawled across her lap. The GPS had long since lost signal, a casualty of the remote wilderness we had ventured into. "I told you, the map said this route was a shortcut." "We'll be at the cabin in no time," I replied, my tone sharper than intended. Frustration bubbled beneath the surface. The last thing I wanted was for her to question my judgment. The road trip had started as a carefree escape, but now it felt like we were treading on the edges of something darker. The shadows lengthened as we drove deeper into the woods, the trees growing thicker and more oppressive. Their twisted branches seemed to intertwine above us, forming a ceiling of foliage that blocked out the last remnants of sunlight. I bit my lip, feeling the weight of an unsettling silence. The forest encased us like a prison, and for the first time, I felt the gnawing sensation of dread. "Look!" Lisa pointed toward a dilapidated sign half obscured by underbrush. The paint had long since faded, but I could make out a few words: "Caution, wildlife area." It struck me as ironic, considering the far more sinister presence that loomed just beyond the trees. I pressed on, the tires crunching softly over gravel. The deeper we went, the more palpable the tension became. It was as if the forest itself exhaled a heavy sigh, wrapping us in a shroud of foreboding. The scent of damp earth mixed with the sweet decay of fallen leaves invaded the car, making me feel nauseous. "Can we stop?" "I need to stretch my legs," Lisa said, her frustration now tinged with a hint of fear. I could see her glancing at the trees, as if they were closing in around us. With a reluctance that gnawed at me, I pulled over to the side of the road. The engine purred to silence, and I could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, sounds that felt almost mocking in their normalcy. The moment I opened the door, an icy gust of wind swept through, sending a shiver down my spine. As I stepped onto the gravel, a sense of being watched prickled at the back of my neck. Lisa followed me out, her brow furrowed. "I don't like this place," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced around, the trees now looming like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into grotesque shapes. "We'll just take a quick break," I replied, trying to inject some confidence into my tone. "Let's grab some snacks and then hit the road again." As I rummaged through our supplies, I heard a sudden crack behind me, a noise sharp enough to slice through the air. I froze, adrenaline flooding my system. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. Lisa nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Maybe it's just an animal," she suggested, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. We both knew that something felt off. Ignoring the gnawing sensation in my gut, I turned to peer into the dense underbrush. Shadows danced as the wind rustled the leaves, but I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of something moving, a flash of gray fur or perhaps a silhouette. "Let's just get back in the car," Lisa urged, her voice strained. I could hear the tremors of panic creeping in. I hesitated, wanting to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I turned back to the car, a scream shattered the fragile tension, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the trees. It was a woman's voice, no, not just a voice. It was anguish incarnate. My heart raced as I glanced at Lisa, who was now pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" she whispered, and I felt my skin prickle. I didn't have an answer. I grabbed her hand, the warmth of her skin a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in my stomach. "We have to go. Now!" I practically pulled her toward the car, our footsteps quickened by instinctual fear. The door creaked open, and we jumped inside, the familiar confines suddenly feeling foreign and stifling. I turned the ignition, the engine sputtering to life as the woods seemed to close in around us. My heart thudded in my chest as I shifted into drive, desperate to escape whatever horror lurked just beyond the trees. The road stretched ahead, seemingly endless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. In the rearview mirror, the trees loomed like sentinels, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw movement among the shadows, a figure or a shape that slipped out of sight as I blinked. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice rising in pitch. Lisa nodded, gripping her seatbelt like a lifeline, her breath coming in short gasps. "I don't want to be here anymore," she choked out, her eyes darting to the sides as if expecting something to lunge from the darkness. "Just focus on the road," I urged, pushing down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, but the feeling of urgency was overshadowed by an encroaching sense of doom. I could almost hear the forest breathing, waiting. As night fell, the shadows deepened, and the road became a tunnel of darkness, shrouded in silence. I glanced at Lisa, her face pale and drawn in the dim light of the dashboard. I wished I could turn back, but the weight of our decision loomed heavy. There was no going back. In that moment, I knew we had crossed a threshold, and whatever lay ahead was far worse than the fear we had left behind. I awoke to the sun filtering through the cracked blinds of the motel room, casting thin lines of light across the floor. The air felt heavy, weighted down with an ominous stillness that seeped into my bones. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second echoing in the otherwise silent space. I reached for my phone, half expecting a barrage of notifications, but the screen was dark, the battery dead. I hadn't charged it since the night before, when I had convinced myself I wouldn't need it. After fumbling in my bag, I found my charger and plugged it into the wall. The motel room felt more like a prison than a sanctuary, the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet reminding me of the decay lurking just beyond the door. I glanced around, half expecting someone to be standing in the shadows, but I was alone. The silence was thick, oppressive. I pushed myself out of bed and walked to the bathroom. As I splashed cold water on my face, the mirror reflected a weary version of myself, one that seemed older and more haggard than I felt just days earlier. A knot tightened in my stomach as I remembered what had happened since we left the highway. The events of the last 24 hours played like a film in slow motion, vivid yet surreal. My mind drifted back to the road, to the unsettling encounter with that stranger, the hitchhiker whose eyes held a depth of despair that unsettled me. I could still see the way he had gazed at me, as if he were trying to carve a piece of his soul into mine. I had felt his pain, an unwelcome reminder of my own struggles. Against my better judgment, I had ignored my instincts and let him into the car. We hadn't made it far before the tension became unbearable. I had been foolish to think that just because we shared a moment of vulnerability, our fates would be entwined for the better. The hitchhiker had started sharing stories about the road, but they quickly spiraled into dark confessions. He spoke of lost loves and shattered dreams, his voice low and raspy, like dry leaves skittering across the pavement. I had exchanged nervous glances with Jenna, my travel companion, silently communicating our shared discomfort. After I dropped him off in that secluded stretch of woods, where the trees loomed like sentinels, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But the relief was short-lived. The moment we turned back onto the highway, a chill settled over the car. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unyielding. I could see Jenna's fingers trembling as she clutched the passenger seat tightly, her eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. As I made my way to the motel office to check out, the memory of the hitchhiker clung to me like a shadow. I felt paranoid, as if he were watching from the tree line, tracking my every move. The receptionist greeted me with a forced smile, her eyes betraying a flicker of recognition that sent an unsettling tremor through me. "Did you enjoy your stay?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. It was fine," I replied, avoiding her gaze. She leaned in slightly, her smile fading. "You might want to be careful out there. Not everyone's intentions are pure." I furrowed my brow, a lump forming in my throat. There was something about her warning that felt more ominous than she'd intended. I grabbed my keys and retreated to the car, where Jenna waited, tapping her foot anxiously against the pavement. "Did you see anyone?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and fear. "No, just the receptionist," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. As I slid into the driver's seat and turned the ignition, the engine rumbled to life, drowning out the silence once more. We hadn't been on the road long before the atmosphere shifted. The trees lining the highway seemed to bend closer, their branches clawing at the sky, casting elongated shadows that swayed with the car. "What's the plan?" Jenna asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Let's just get to the next town," I replied, hoping to sound more confident than I felt. But as we drove, the road twisted and turned, the landscape morphing from barren plains to dense forest. The GPS flickered sporadically, stuttering with each turn until it finally went dark. I groaned, slamming my palm against the dashboard. "Great," Jenna said, glancing nervously out the window. "Just great." I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, and took a deep breath. I got out, scanning our surroundings. The woods felt alive with whispers, the rustling leaves sounding like 1,000 voices. I fought against the rising panic, scolding myself for letting my imagination get the better of me. "Let's just check the map," I said, but as I rummaged through the glove compartment, I felt a prickling sense of unease creep over my skin. That's when we heard it, a low growl, muffled by the trees. My heart raced, and I turned to Jenna, whose eyes were wide with terror. The growl grew louder, more defined, echoing through the thickets. It was primal, a threat woven into the very fabric of the forest around us. "We need to get back in the car," I urged, adrenaline surging through me. Before I could grab the door handle, movement caught my eye. I saw a figure emerging from the tree line, a silhouette against the dappled sunlight. Instinctively, I stepped back, shielding Jenna behind me as the figure drew closer, its features obscured by shadows. It was him, the hitchhiker. He stood there, eyes wild and sunken, a grin splitting his face that twisted my insides. I could feel Jenna shudder against me, her breath hitching in fear. "Help me," he rasped, his voice a chilling echo of the road we had traveled. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen, caught in the grip of terror. I could barely breathe as the forest around us held its breath, waiting for the next moment, whatever it would be. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the highway as the tires of our car hummed against the asphalt. I glanced at the gas gauge. Almost empty. The last town we passed had been a ghostly shell, its faded signs whispering of lives long abandoned. I had thought we could push it, but now doubt gnawed at me. "Do you see anything up ahead?" I asked Alex, who was gripping the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. He squinted into the distance, where the asphalt seemed to shimmer in the heat of the evening. "Nothing," he replied, his voice strained. "Just more of this damn road." I turned to the rearview mirror, looking at Jenna, our excited wanderer. She had fallen asleep, her curly hair spilling over the seat like a dark cloud. A sense of unease washed over me, one I couldn't shake. It felt wrong to be so far from civilization, trapped in a car with dwindling gas and too many miles behind us. "Maybe we should have filled up in that last town," I muttered, more to myself than to Alex. "Yeah, well, hindsight's always 20/20, he snapped. The tension between us was palpable, an electric current that surged whenever we discussed our dwindling resources. We pressed on in silence, the landscape shifting subtly from the flat plains to rolling hills. The sky deepened into a bruised purple, and I could feel the air grow cooler. An unsettling thought nagged at me. What if we ran out of gas? Around us, the silence of the road thickened, enveloping us like a suffocating blanket. The light of the sun was fading, and the shadows began to stretch and twist like fingers reaching toward us. "Just a little further," Alex said, more to convince himself than me. I could see the weariness etched across his features, the strain in his muscles as he continued to grip the wheel. As night fell, I noticed something odd. A flicker of lights in the distance, slowly coming into view. My heart quickened. Hope sparked in my chest, and I leaned forward, urging Alex to turn on the headlights. "Do you see that?" "A gas station," I exclaimed, pointing toward the flickering neon sign promising fuel and refuge. "Yes." "Finally," he replied, a hint of relief punctuating his voice. As we approached, the station appeared more decrepit than I had hoped. The sign seemed to flicker erratically as if it were trying to signal us to turn back, but the desperate need for gas urged us onward. The place looked barely in operation, but as we coasted to a stop, I noticed a single figure moving inside. "Is anyone even here?" I asked, as Alex shut off the engine. "Let's find out," he said, his voice low. We stepped out into the cold night air, the crunch of gravel underfoot sounding louder than it should. My senses sharpened, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The faint smell of gasoline hung in the air, mingling with the musty scent of decay. Jenna stirred in the back seat, rubbing her eyes. "Where are we?" "A gas station," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Just a quick stop." Alex walked toward the door, but I hesitated, suddenly aware of all that lay before us, the dimly lit windows, the uneven flooring, the air of abandonment that cloaked the place. It felt wrong, like stepping into a trap. "Do you think we should go in?" I asked. "It's either this or risk being stranded," Alex replied, looking back at me with a mix of determination and exhaustion. Reluctantly, I followed him inside. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, the sound echoing against the empty walls. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, struggling against the darkness that seemed to seep through the cracks. The shelves were stocked with dusty items, most of them expired. "Hello?" Alex called, his voice breaking the heavy silence. No response. I felt a twinge of panic in my chest. Shouldn't someone have heard us? Shouldn't there be a clerk or at least a bell to announce our arrival? We moved further inside, eyeing the old gas pumps through the grimy window. Jenna followed, rubbing sleep from her eyes, oblivious to the dread that had settled over me like a cold shroud. "Can we just hurry up and get gas?" she asked, a yawn escaping her lips. "Yeah, just a moment," Alex replied, his voice strained. As he approached the counter, I drifted back to the window, peering out into the dark expanse of the highway. My heart sank. The night felt alive, pulsing with a low hum, as if the road itself were breathing. For a moment, I thought I saw movement. A figure in the distance, lurking just outside the reach of the headlights. "Alex," I called, my voice higher than I intended. "I think someone is out there." He turned, frowning. "Where?" "By the edge of the lot." I swear I saw someone just standing there. The tension returned, thickening the air around us. A flicker of doubt crossed Alex's face. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "I don't see anything," he said, but even as the words left his lips, a chill crept into the room. Jenna clutched my arm, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. But even as I assured her, the unease clawed at my insides. Without warning, the lights overhead sputtered, plunging us into darkness for a heartbeat before flickering back to life. I took a step back, feeling trapped in a narrow space, the walls closing in. "Let's just get the gas and go," Alex urged again, returning to the counter. Then I saw it, a shadow flitting past the window, a glimpse of something unmistakably human. A figure, too tall, darting out of sight. I felt my breath hitch, the air turning acrid in my lungs. "Alex, we need to leave. Now!" But as I turned to grab Jenna's hand, I realized the door had swung shut, the weight of something sinister pressing in from all sides. The atmosphere grew thick, the shadows coalescing, and the flickering lights above us began to dim once more. "Did you lock the door?" I asked, the panic rising in my voice. "No," he replied, confusion clouding his features. A shiver ran down my spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. And as the lights flickered one last time, plunging us into an eerie twilight, I knew we weren't alone.